just wanna talk about some books. Hey, I just wanna talk about some books. Talk about some books. Talk about some books. Hey, I just wanna talk about some books with you.
Hey everybody, I'm Joe,
And I'm JoJo, and this is Canonical Nonsense.
and we are just two cups of Joe reading books.
So this season, we are exploring the Dragon canon as we are 16 to 17 episodes in. I actually don't know which one this is. And we are looking at the portrayal of dragons in modern fantasy. What are we reading today?
Today we are exploring the romantasy genre for the first time with Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. And for this episode, we are only going to discuss the first half of this book, stopping at the end of chapter 16, which is right after Threshing. And if you know what Threshing is, you're probably good.
So, just a little bit of background. Fourth Wing is the first book in the Empyrean Pentology, which means there's going to be 5 books, 3 of which are out now. It follows our protagonist Violet as she navigates the high stakes worlds of Dragon Rider War College. Rebecca Yarros had her start in the romance genre, where she has published around 20 books. So, an established author before Fourth Wing came. Fourth Wing is her first dip into fantasy and is considered part of the romantasy subgenre, a phrase you cannot escape when it comes to literature. It's everywhere. So this subgenre has existed before this book. Yarros probably did help define it with this series. So just like a little background on the listening for this book, I listened to it for the first 50% in a car with all of my friends, and we had a real long argument about whether or not it defined it or not. And I think we settled on that like A Crown of Thorns is probably the first big romantasy book. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
I don't know what a Crown of Thorns is.
It's the fairy one.
There are so many fairy ones. Do you mean like A Court of Thorns and Roses?
Yes, I mean A Court of Thorns and Roses.
Yeah, I would agree with your friends that that probably is the first. Maybe Throne of Glass before that. It was probably a Sarah J. Maas book.
Got it. So this book made $1 million. So it's definitely got to have its effect in the romantasy genre at this point, because I'm sure around this time there's a million copycat books coming out, right?
Yeah, and this book itself definitely takes a lot of inspiration from the Court of Thorns and Roses, specifically in the character of Xaden. He's definitely inspired by one of the characters in A Court of Thorns and Roses, so that makes a lot of sense. I think that because, and Sarah J. Maas is a very successful author, but Rebecca Yarros, I think, is the highest grossing fantasy author right now, period, which is wild. And it seems like the marketing campaigns surrounding a lot of these books really started after the Fourth Wing book. Because I don't know that you were part of the bookish community at this point, but when Fourth Wing's book first came out, it was all the sprayed edges and it was all over the place on social media. And I don't think it was the first book that did this, but it was just the marketing campaign was so successful and the book was so beautiful that I think it was really a big part of all of that. Now, like, every book has sprayed edges and every book has a special edition. And again, I don't think Fourth Wing was the first book to do that, but because it was so successful, it really solidified that as part of the book buying experience and the marketing experience of these books.
It was really interesting because I just got back from New York Comic Con, and it's so clear how romantasy has eaten the publishing genre. In that last year there was panels about fantasy and genre fiction, and this year the only panels were on romantasy. And on the convention floor, what the publishers are pushing is exactly what you described. So not part of the book talk world. I go to one comic book convention every year, and I can even notice it.
Yeah, so Romantasy, I believe it was in the past year, maybe the past 2 years. I did not look this up. On the Goodreads Choice Awards, had been just part of the fantasy genre, the books that were being nominated. And just recently, it was changed into its own genre, which people were pretty, I think, for the most part, happy with that it was a subgenre. In the same way that, like, fantasy horror is kind of like a subgenre of fantasy, because it is distinct from high fantasy, epic fantasy in multiple ways, though it does have crossover. But but the obvious one is that the romance is the driving factor in these books. And there's a huge conversation that could be had about the difference between romantasy, fantasy romance, romantic fantasy, and fantasy with a romantic subplot are all different things. We're not going to talk about that in this episode, at least.
Like music, labels exist to sell. They don't exist as part of art. They just exist to commercialize it. So these labels don't really exist outside of publishing.
So there's a lot of speculation regarding how Rebecca Yarros got into writing fantasy, and some people have said that this was a money grab by her publishing company, or that the reason this book skyrocketed to such popularity is because of its marketing campaign and for no other reason. I think that it became successful because of its marketing campaign in part, but I do think that there's something about this book that is quite readable and is very much a part of its popularity. So I don't think it was purely because of its marketing campaign that is why it's so successful. But other people have really talked about this at length, so we're gonna not discuss it that much further in this conversation, at least. You can go find that somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I do think part of its success is that people have read it and then other people want to talk about reading. There's a really, I've definitely talked about Italo Calvino's I Found a Winter's Night a Traveler before in this podcast because I really like it. And it's a book about reading. And there's a chapter pretty early on where you're reading a book and then you meet someone else who's like trying to read that book for you. And the reading experience changes because you now are no longer on this solo journey. You're on this journey together with someone else. And I think that's really beautiful. And I think that's a beautiful part about this book. I mentioned it before that I listened to half of this book on a road trip to Dollywood with two other girlfriends of mine. And that was like a very delightful experience. And it was really great to share a book with them on this journey together. And we would talk about it all the time. We started touching each other's faces a lot, which we'll talk about later. So I have gotten about 4 chapters in after that road trip. They've both finished the second book. And I don't know if they've finished the third one yet. I know one of them has. So they're like ready to go. And they're like already waiting for the TV show to come out. So there's something about this book that builds community that I think is like really important and lovely and beautiful. And now we're actually going to talk about what's in the book, which I have different thoughts on.
I think you told me that your friend was already finished with the third book a week after you came back from Dollywood, and I was just like, holy shit, like how did she finish this fast? Yeah, I do agree that this book probably is a good gateway back into reading for people who haven't been reading that much after college or high school. They just get a little burnt out with reading and then they stop. And when I say it's easy to read, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean it's just really easy to read. And I think that is a really good thing for all books. I think that there's a ton of discourse surrounding this book and other books in the romantasy genre regarding like the death of literature. And I don't really think that's a fair assessment because there have always been, and I'm not lumping all of romantasy into one category when I say this, but there have always been bad books and there have always been good books. And that's always going to be the case. And I don't think it's a fair assessment. I think that there are some things going on in this book that I personally disagree with. But before I get into all of that, I just want to say as a reminder to listeners that this is a spoiler-rich podcast. So if you have somehow made it through the past 3 years and have not had Fourth Wing spoiled for you, and you don't want it spoiled for you, go read it now, and we will be here when you come back. But if you are in the process of reading Fourth Wing and you have passed the threshing scenes, then you won't be spoiled at all during this episode, so feel free to listen. We have a lot to talk about before we start the plot, and the first thing we want to talk about is, why we chose to read this book when we chose it, because I think the easy thing that we could have done when we started this podcast was to read this first, since it was such a big deal and it was so popular. But do you want to explain our choices here?
Yeah, I mean, when we started it, this was like very important to me that we read them somewhat chronologically because this is a look at canon. The whole point is to like get an understanding of what existed first and what it was built on. And if you have been following along on the podcast, you'll understand that we started with the first Pern book, which is the granddaddy of all dragon riding books, and a lot of dragon books take some ideas from them. I mean, it takes some dragons have been around before. Per
And definitely this book is also influenced by Pern.
yeah.
I don't know if we'll talk about that in this episode, but we are definitely going to talk about it in at least our next episode because it doesn't have a ton of influences from other books, but it is influenced by Pern.
So we started with Pern, then we went to Earthsea, which isn't as dragon heavy as basically any other book we've been to. But if you talk about older books that inspire dragons, you get Pern and then you get Earthsea. And then we read Guards Cards, which is later. And as we've been going through, we've been trying to understand, when people write about dragons, what are they referencing? What are they talking about? What are they interested? What are innovations on the forum? What aren't? So it was really important for us to read a book that is set in 2023 later than some books that are earlier in the process.
Yeah, and I think the issue with both of us is that neither of us are very interested in romance novels, and we understand that we are not the target audience for this book. And we wanted to be fair in our critique of this book, and we wanted to come to it with this knowledge of the canon, but we also knew that we do have to read it at some point because this book is already and is going to affect the dragon canon moving forward because it's just been such a big event in the book world. And I think it'll be interesting if we read a book that was published after how this book will have influenced it for better or for worse. I just wanted to say again, we are not the target audience for this book, and I often do struggle with romance heavy books for a few reasons that I'm going to talk about as we go through, because I think that it's totally possible, and I have read romance books or romance novels and romantic fantasy books that I really loved, but a lot of them fall into the same traps, and this book does as well.
I'm just going to be even more honest and not dance around anything. I was almost positive that I wasn't going to like this. I'm still pretty sure that I'm not going to like it, even though I'm not finished, just because this is not the type of book that I like to read. And I wanted to wait because this is a book that a lot of people love, and a lot of people this is how they get back into reading, which is like a very beautiful thing. And I didn't want to shit on anyone's parade. And I didn't want to be mean about something that people care about. So I think I needed to work as a podcaster for a little bit before I got here. But I do think that we've figured out a way to talk about books and share our opinions in a way that says that these are opinions. There is no true right answer about whether you can enjoy a book or not as an individual. And I think that we have the ability to speak about our experience reading this book as our own experiences and our own interpretations, and not a way that is necessarily antagonistic to anybody else's.
Yeah, we have different values as readers. And finally, the reason we waited to read this book is because it has been talked about endlessly on podcast and book review forum that review fantasy books and romantasy books so endlessly, both positively and negatively, that we really weren't sure what, if anything, we could add to the discussion. And we still aren't sure if we're adding anything new to the discussion. And we don't want to dogpile onto things that people have just shit on so much. We are probably going to do that a little bit too. So with that being said, I do want to just share a list of things that we aren't going to spend a ton of time on, but we wanted to acknowledge that we did have a 4-hour conversation where we were just like, what the heck is happening with this thing, when JoJo had just come back from Dollywood. So number one is the small magic system, which includes magic pens, which, yikes. But again, not going to spend time on it.
The card talked in length about how it's crazy that they have a thigh master, but they don't have a ballpoint pen. And now you know, and we don't have to talk about it anymore.
Or pencils. That was the thing that really got me. She couldn't use a pencil. It was either a quill or these magic pens. We're not really going to talk about the craft of writing in this book. This book includes really strange phrases, including Violet, who's the main character's fisted stomach and unhinging jaw, not in a sexual context, just in a aghast context. And she also says things multiple times like for the win, hot mess. Zayden says like, you guys are tight, which is kind of very millennial slang. And some people just lose their mind about this. We also were like, what is happening? But again, we're not really going to talk about it. We're also not really going to talk about the incorrect usage of Scottish Gaelic, which was really upsetting for a lot of people. If you want to know more about that, I would seek out someone who is an expert on the language or is a speaker of the language, because they have more to say and will say it better than either of us. We are also going to talk about the fact that the parapet is not a parapet, it's a wall. Or like a parapet is a wall, but this parapet is a bridge. And that was really confusing for me because I was like, what? why is this parapet so dangerous?
That was a huge thing in the car. Anytime fisting was mentioned, that got a big thing in the car. But literally, once we got out of the car and we're back with our various partners and male friends, all we talked about was the fact that it was not a parapet for like 30 minutes.
Yeah, the gauntlet is American Ninja Warrior, literally, just we're gonna state that, but we're not gonna dwell on it. The army training camp is a meat grinder, which would absolutely be terrible for morale with how many people die. I'm gonna mention at one point she says explicitly how many people have died, and they are like 2 months in, it's like a fourth of the people have died. And that's just kind of a ridiculous number. It's just like a stupid thing. We also are just gonna mention, but not dwell on, the fact that Violet uses random social studies level facts to give exposition, which are not helpful. It would be a bit different if the facts she gave us were actually helpful exposition, but it's not.
It's like crop rotation information. It's like, this is the gross national import of this fantasy country.
It seems like she wrote an essay about the trade routes for her scribe class and then is reciting it in her brain. And then finally, we will talk a little bit about the EDS representation in this episode. EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, is a connective tissue disorder that Violet has, like a kind of fantasy version of, and Rebecca Yarros also has. Do you want to explain why, JoJo?
So I don't have EDS, but I do have a hypermobility disorder, which is a spectrum of disorders that EDS falls under. So I literally like have the chronic condition. I mean, there's so many different ways you can talk about bodies, more medical, less medical. But yeah, I have a hypermobility disorder. It's not the same as Violet's. I have a lot of chronic pain issues. I don't dislocate like she does. So it's a little bit different. But one of my friends who was in the car with me also has a hypermobility disorder. So we were sort of talking about that. I also talked to my physical therapist about this book because everyone's read it. And she had some comments on that too. So in some ways, I can really see myself in this book. And other ways, I can absolutely not see myself in this book. Part of that is because it's a spectrum disorder. So there's different spectrums. There are people who dislocate. I don't do that. But we will touch upon it. But it might just be me being like, as a person with hypermobility, I have thoughts on this. But we're probably going to keep it quiet. And then we might just do a whole chunk of it sometime later.
We're gonna wait until we finish the second part to discuss whether or not we recommend this book, though you can probably guess by the way we're talking about it already. I'm also gonna just go over some trigger warnings. This book does have explicit sexual content that is consensual, but that is not in this part of the book. It's in the second part. There is death. I mean, it's a war. There's going to be death. And there are some gruesome depictions of injury. Anytime bones are described as snapping like twigs, I just get kind of grossed out. And there are some really kind of gross descriptions of people getting hurt, so just be aware of that. But really not too many trigger warnings from my point of view.
As a book where everyone is trying to jump their bones all the time and everyone's dying all the time, it is incredibly PG-13.
Yeah, it's a CW show. Okay, so with all of that being said, let's start the plot. So, I know I just said we were going to get all of those nitpicky things out of the way so we didn't nitpick, but I'm going to start with a nitpick. The book begins by stating that the following events were translated into the modern language by Jacinia, who is a character in the book who is friends with Violet, and they are the same age. And I've heard a lot of people discuss that it's weird that Jacinia would have written this book in the first person and focus so much on the sex and Violet's kind of sex drive. But if you're kind of reading this in the sense that it's Violet's diary, it would make sense that it's in first person, and it would make sense that she's writing her inner desires down. We have some pretty spicy personal writings of historical figures that exist. That is a thing that you can seek out. What doesn't make sense about this note is that the language changed so drastically within Jacinia's lifetime that she is referring to the current language as modern and that it needed to be translated for people to be able to understand it. That's not how language works. But anyway, that's totally a nitpick. And let's get started with the rest.
It was a pretty big joke anytime something absolutely stupid or horny happened that we were like, someone is in a dusty army war college reading this. So it was a good laugh from the Dollywood car. So I think it's funny just to imagine that anytime something's happening, some stuffy general is like, aha, yes, of course.
The book starts with Violet walking to her mom's office. She hears her sister, whose name is Mira, fighting with her mom about her decision to force Violet to go into the Dragon Rider's quadrant instead of the Scribe quadrant. We learn that her mother is also a general. Her sister thinks she's going to die there because she's tiny and she's weak and she's small and she has this connective tissue disorder, which and her mom and sister are both dragon riders. We also learn that her deceased brother was a dragon rider. Her father was not. Yeah.
Yeah. The whole thing is like, they're so strong, and I'm just a weak little daddy's girl. But then daddy died, so now mommy wants to kill me by checked notes, just like following the family tradition. It's just like a weird conflict in the book where she spends a lot of time talking about how her mom hates her and wants her dead, but then also is very supportive of her in a way that like nobody else in the book is. And it's just very weird that she's just like, I can't be a big, strong hero because whatever, even though I need to. And it's just like, come on, man, accept the call to adventure, you know? This is a thing that happens throughout this book, is just her rejecting the call to adventure. And it made it so difficult to get through the first like 20% of this book.
There's like an agility test that they have to pass in order to be able to enter the dragon's quadrant, and she did pass that. So she does have some skill, even though she never shows it to us on screen. She's always like, I'm a big dummy when it comes to physical stuff, even though she like has 100% accuracy when throwing things. We get a lot of exposition here in Violet's brain about how her mother doesn't care about her. We don't actually see this a lot on page. This is a scene where her mother actually tells her sister, who Violet says is her staunchest supporter multiple times, but her sister's like, she's gonna die, she's not gonna survive. And her mom says Violet deals with more pain before breakfast than her sister does in a week, which is a pretty supportive thing to say, in my opinion. And Violet is surprised by this, but we actually never see really any flashbacks or scenes where her mom is like really dismissive. Her mom says a weird thing about her hair and her eyes and her skin, but I don't know, like it doesn't ever get to the level that I'm like, oh yeah, your mom does want you dead.
After they say the pain comment, I'm like, oh my God, is this book gonna show chronic pain on screen? Are we gonna get scenes of her like waking up in pain and like stretching for 20 minutes until the Tylenol kicks in? Or just after a long day, propping up your leg because your knee's bothering you in a certain way? And it was like, nope, it's only injury because injury is cool. We never really see her in pain. Every now and then they'll be like, I'm in pain, or like, I'm always in pain, but you don't actually get to see it, which is kind of heartbreaking as someone with chronic pain. They talk a lot about how she has a mental wall that she can throw up, which is just like, as someone who's been in chronic pain for 10 years, I mean, yeah, sometimes, but like, it's just not nothing you can do after a while, you know? I would like to see chronic pain on page. I just don't think it looks good. And this book is about looking good.
Yeah, just another note about her mother. She seems to really misunderstand her mother's relationship with her. And I don't think this is intentional by the author, but this is not the only relationship that she completely misinterprets and misunderstands. Her sister Mira then takes her back to her room. She helps her repack her bag and like takes a ton of books out of the bag, including a book that her father gave her, which is a book of fables. She gives her a pair of shoes that have treads because she's like, you're gonna slip and fall off the parapet if you don't. And then she gives her this armored corset that's made of dragon scales and it's like, wear it all the time, even when you sleep, never take it off. People are gonna try to kill you. She also braids her hair, and we learn that her hair has this really weird. Do you want to explain her hair?
Here's the thing is that I actually had to have somebody explain this to me because it's so dumb. She's so blonde that her hair turns white at the end.
No, her hair is dark at the top, and then it turns white at the, or like silver at the bottom, naturally.
Okay.
Go just Google Violet Scoringale, and you'll see like 1,000 AI generated fan art. And it's not art if it's AI generated, but 1,000 AI generated images of her, and you'll understand what she looks like.
This is so silly. Just give her blue hair. I just don't. Does anybody else have weird hair in this book?
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think anyone has like a natural ombre. She has like a natural ombre.
It's so weird. Okay, I didn't get this at all. I thought this was such a weird, unnecessary thing to like throw in there. Like, by the way, her hair's weird. And you're like, why? Okay.
And there's something about like her mom was sick when she was pregnant with her, and maybe it caused this illness, and also the illness is connected to her ombre, but it's ill defined and she doesn't really understand it. and she's not curious enough to try to figure it out. They go to the sign-ups, her sister says goodbye, she climbs up to cross this parapet, which is really this really long, skinny bridge. While she's waiting in line, she makes two friends, one of which dies immediately.
We made so many jokes about this because the boy introduces himself and he's like, "Hi, I'm so and so. I just got engaged to the love of my life. So when we get out of here, we can start a beautiful new family and everything will be great. And I can't wait to be a dragon rider." And then just like bleh, dead immediately. We thought he was gonna last at least a chapter, and he barely made it 3 pages.
Yeah, this is also a theme in the book where they'll introduce someone and then kill them immediately. The other person is named Rhiannon, and she notices that Rhiannon's boots have no tread on them, they're riding boots. And so she's like, "Here, switch boots, switch one boot with me so that you don't slide off the parapet." And this is so that we know that Violet is selfless.
I thought it was so cute. This reminded me of the first day of camp. I have two friends that live together and they met at summer camp because they were both in the same sweatshirt because they both fit. This is like just such cute camp vibes.
There's also this, like, psychopathic man named Jack Barlow who's a total douchebag, and he's, I think, not right behind her, but he's, like, 2 people behind her, and he's like, "Your name is Thorngale, you look weak, I'm gonna kill you!" And he's like this and the whole fucking book. It's just crazy.
There's never been a flimsier villain. I don't understand how he didn't get blown off the parapet because he's just like a loose leaf of paper to me.
They reach the top. A few third years are taking their names, before they step onto the parapet, and she sees Xaden for the first time. And her description of him is also psychopathic, in my opinion. It's insane the way she describes another human being. The third turns in my direction, and my heart simply stops. He's tall, with wind-blown black hair and dark brows. The line of his jaw is strong and covered by warm tawny skin and dark stubble. And when he folds his arms across his torso, the muscles in his chest and arms ripple, moving in a way that makes me swallow. And his eyes his eyes are the shade of gold-flecked onyx. The contrast is startling, jaw-dropping even. Everything about him is. His features are so harsh that they look carved, and yet they're astonishingly perfect, like an artist worked a lifetime sculpting him, and at least a year of it was spent on his mouth. He's the most exquisite man I've ever seen.
Yeah, I forgot that he also has black eyes with gold flecks.
She sees that. Do you know what color my eyes are?
Blue?
Yeah. I mean, I guess we're best friends. We should know what color. I just don't think you notice the color of someone's eyes the first time you see them
I mean, you do if they're black pits.
with gold flecks. How does she like? Is she? How close is she to this guy?
We talk about the uncanny valley and like how humans are so good at noticing other humans and stuff, and just like especially pupils and stuff and picking out where people are looking at. It would feel insane to look at a black pupil and a black eye with gold flecks around it unless it's mostly gold with like a little bit of obsidian, which is not what they said. You would just feel insane. It would be like looking at a monster.
Honestly, most of what she says about him is okay, sure, but the whole thing about a sculptor spent his a lifetime sculpting him and a whole year was spent on his mouth is so objectifying that this is like a problem that I have with so much romance is that I kind of am grossed out by how much these people are objectifying the opposite person. Like, can you imagine if the genders were reversed here and he were describing her mouth that way? It would be in one of those men writing women forums. And this kind of goes on throughout the whole book. Like, this is not the only example of this, that she's just constantly objectifying this guy. It's like crazy. But he does kind of look like Falar. Do you remember, like, Falar also has those special gold eyes from Pern?
I remember. Yeah, Falar is like gold eyes and brown hair. Do you think he is a Falar character?
He is a Falar character, and he also has, I think, brown skin. But I think Falar is short. I think it says in Pern that Falar is kind of short. And Xaden's like the tallest tall person to ever tall.
No, Xaden is 6'4", which is the hottest height a man can be. That's not an objective thing. I think men can be attractive at all heights. I'm just saying if you were ask American culture right now what the hottest height a man can be, it would be 6'4". I've gone on dates with men that are 6'4". You're just talking to their belly button. It's a hard dating, but that's what people want.
Yeah, but you're short.
Yeah, well, I'm the same height as her probably. So
I think she's shorter than you are.
they describe her, and I think she's already been described at this point as being like 100 pounds soaking wet or something, which means that she has to either be anorexic to be a regular height or very, very small.
She says that her bag weighs 30 pounds before her sister helps her repack it, and that it's a third of her weight, so she weighs 90 pounds.
Which either she is deeply, deeply anorexic and malnourished, or she's like 4'10", you know?
Yeah, she's like Angela from The Office. Angela from The Office is always saying that she's like 90 pounds and she's really tiny and she like eats one almond for lunch. Anyway, so Xaden, she kind of explains here, we get this exposition about who Xaden is. And her sister warned her before she went. She was like, Xaden's going to try to kill you, so stay away from him. His dad was the leader of a rebellion that rebelled against the empire that she's a part of and that her family is a part of, and was executed for it along with all of the other. I keep thinking insurrectionists, but I kind of don't want to invoke that word. His dad was the MAGA shaman, I guess.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing is that if his dad was the MAGA shaman, that would have been great to know. This is a book that has a rebellion and has people divided by politics, and it has absolutely no politics in it. I have been informed by my friends that eventually they do get to the politics. So if you're yelling at me that, hey, actually they do eventually write this in and it does make sense, I'm glad that you got to that point. Right now, there's a lot of people on different dividing lines of some sort of political system that is in no way defined on different sides of issues that do not exist. It's kind of maddening to be like, these people hate each other. And you're like, why? And they're like, for reasons. And I'm like, why? There's a rebellion. And I was like, what's it about? And they're like, we'll get to it later. We have to discuss the agricultural yield of this specific plant first or whatever.
I think the book is trying to say, well, propaganda kept Violet from knowing the truth or whatever. But we don't even learn what the propaganda was. We just know that they rebelled, but we don't know any reason why, what their rhetoric was. Usually, when something like that happens, there's some information on what it was. Even if that information is inaccurate, the government is still trying to spin it, or the people who are in power are able to spin it to kind of portray those who are rebelling in a light of like, this is what they wanted. Isn't that scary? Don't you don't you want them to be killed, kind of thing? And we just don't get any of that.
We don't even get like very American, they're coming for our freedoms, which we saw
Yeah.
in Alta, which was like really interesting. It's very hard to go to this book from Joust and Alta, which have some of the best political writing in fantasy I've experienced. It just is so nuanced in detail. And then to come to a book where the biggest politics is somebody rebelled against something for something, it's just really disheartening.
Yeah, if you want a politically thrilling book that talks about how in war no one really wins, go read Joust and Alta and how no one, oh my God, so good. And like the way that politics is able to spin things so people villainize each other even within a group that is against a secondary group, the way that they create classes of who is right and who is wrong. It's so good. That is not discussed at all here. Anyway, so they have a little bit of banter, but it's not really banter because Violet does not have any game. She asks him if he's going to kill her because he realizes who she is, and he just says, no, I don't have to. The parapet was going to do that for me.
Absolutely no game. She's like, are you gonna kill me? And he's like, I don't know, man. We just met. We'll figure it out later.
Yeah, I also do want to say we learn that all of the children of the rebellion, so children of the people who rebelled, who were under 18, are all conscripted to the Dragon Riders quadrant. They all have to join. And they also have like a fancy tattoo because it's sexy. That was given to them by a dragon. She crosses the parapet in the pouring rain and thinks about those geography facts. And behind her, Jack starts throwing people off to get to her. And he's like, I'm gonna kill you. She's able to finish crossing just as he reaches her and is able to get on the rolls on the other side. So she's officially a cadet. She pulls out a dagger, which she had on her person, and points it at his crotch. This exchange was, in my opinion, a little bit confusing. So legally, she can kill him at this point because he's not a cadet until he finishes crossing the parapet, and cadets are not allowed to kill each other when they are in a group setting. But we also learn here that cadets can legally kill each other almost anytime other than this group setting, or when they are sleeping, or if they were in the same squad. And the people taking the role on the other side of the parapet, they ask, are you going to kill him? It's okay, like if you do, whatever, we don't care. And she's like, no, I'm not going to kill him. And she says this because she says she doesn't think she could kill him from the angle that her knife is at. But she is right next to his femoral artery. It's right there.
Yeah, this whole scene, there's a lot in this book about when you can legally kill someone, and it doesn't make any sense, in my opinion. It just seems like whatever the vibe is at the moment. Or sometimes it's legal to kill someone, and then there's no consequences for that action. It's just like, oh, you killed him and you shouldn't supposed to. Bad boy.
She asks if he's going to follow the rules of, the codex, which is what has all these rules about when to kill and when not to kill people, and he says he will, and then he steps off the parapet and immediately says he's going to kill her, which is true, like, that he can do both. He can follow the rules and kill her because the rules allow it, and she just allowed him to say that, and she's supposed to be smart! Ugh, I hated that scene. It was so stupid.
They hype this up later in the book, but she does suffer from the Batman rule. Like, protagonists aren't allowed to be able to kill people emotionally. And if they do, like, it's a whole thing. Yeah, it's so annoying.
But Jack Barlow is a raging serial killer, basically. He kills so many on screen, he kills so many people throughout this book and tries to and attempts to murder people. And it's kind of like this situation where, like, if she had tried to kill him or like pushed him off the parapet or slashed his balls or like stabbed him up into his pelvic cavity and got his femoral artery, she probably would have saved like 20 lives because they wouldn't have been killed by Jack then. So, like, she kind of allowed 20 people to die by not taking care of him. And she has multiple chances to kill him and she doesn't take it, so.
Yeah, but if she killed him, then she would be just as bad as him. Have you ever thought about that, Joe? That like basically it's like the exact same thing. You know what I mean? I'm sorry. It's just it's a dumb cliche that is in every fantasy, and I think it's so stupid. I mean, I personally have a very strong stance against killing. Like I don't think
Oh,
there should be
yeah.
a death penalty, all of this other stuff. But every character in every book suffers from the like weird Batman mentality. Like they can't kill. Come up with a good reason and characterization behind it or don't.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm so tired of the protagonist having to kind of go through this whole journey about how, like, and then when they do kill someone, they're like, killed. I don't care. You're in a war college. I also agree with JoJo that we shouldn't kill people in reality, and I'm also against the death penalty. But this is fantasy. Rhiannon finds her and thanks her for the boot. She's like, I would have totally fallen off. Dane then finds her, and we learn Dane is her childhood crush and best friend and is a second year at this war college, which is a 3-year program. And he also eternally infantilizes her. He tells Rhiannon that he will make sure they're in the same squad and takes Violet to his room so he can help wrap her knee, which she hurt somehow while she was crossing the parapet. He tells her his signet power, which is granted by the bond between his dragons. So we have magical powers granted through the dragon bond, and that's a pretty common trope. And his is that he can read people's recent memories if he is touching them. Do you want to talk about the face touching?
Okay, so Dane touches her face all the time, and I haven't gotten to this in the book, but he says he can read people's minds while he's touching her. And
He says this in this scene.
oh, yeah, which I missed. And then he touches her face so much throughout this book that everyone in the car started touching each other's face like all vacation. We're just in Dollywood just being like, we're such good friends, and then like stroking each other's cheeks because that's what friends do, right? They touch each other's face. That's why Dane was touching Violet's face so much. It's just normal friend stuff. It's so weird. Ah.
Yeah, he touches her face in the scene kind of almost immediately after he says that, and she doesn't even think like, I wonder if he's reading my memories right now. Probably not. No, I trust him. He wouldn't do that. She doesn't like have that moment, and you'd think she would figure this out at some point. But she never does. They then go back down to the where everyone's congregating. They're talked at by the adults who lead the war college and have a very laid back management strategy. They're put into squads. She and Rhiannon are under Dane as their squad leader, and Zayden then moves him under his wing. So there are 4 wings, which are like a larger group, which we also see that term is in Pern. They have the dragon group is called a wing. And she's like, oh no, why is he doing this? It's because he wants to kill me for no real reason. Then Zayden makes this kind of mean spirited speech where he's like, you think you're pretty hot shit, right? And everyone's like, yeah. And he's like, well, you're not. And then a bunch of dragons appear and a bunch of people run away for some reason. And then the dragons barbecue them.
Yeah, we couldn't figure out what was going on in the car. It does seem like this society does not interact with dragons a lot unless you're an actual rider because dragons don't seem to like people. So I kind of guess it, but you went to dragon school to learn dragons, and then dragons show up, and you're like, oh shit, and then you run away and immediately die. A thing you probably would have known if you had gone to dragon school, because it's the first thing you know about dragons is that they don't like people and they'll eat the weak. So this exists just to establish stakes and build tension, and it just really made me want to like roll up a newspaper and like hit the book. Building tension through plot contrivances doesn't really work because people are confused, not scared. They're like, why would you run if you want at Dragon College from dragons if you wanted to do a dragon? I understand that you're like, oh, this is real scary, people are dying, but it just doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. I feel like if I saw like if a dinosaur appeared in front of me when I knew I was going to see a dinosaur, I would be like, "Oh fuck, that's a dinosaur." But I wouldn't run from the dinosaur, especially if it's a dinosaur that's bonded to another human and I know it's not a wild dinosaur that's going to just rampage. Just doesn't really make sense. They should know a little bit about how the dragon bond works before they get here. I'm going to read the passage because this is the first time we have a dragon on page. So it says, "Steam blasts my face as the navy blue one, directly in front of me, exhales through its wide nostrils. Its glistening blue horns rise above its head in an elegant, lethal sweep, and its wings flare momentarily before tucking in, the tip of their top joint crowned with a single fierce talon. Their tails are just as fatal, but I can't see them at this angle because they're sitting on a wall, or even tell which breed of dragon it is without that clue, because their tails tell you what breed they are. All are deadly. There are 3 dragons in various shades of red, 2 shades of green, and 1 brown, like Mom's, 1 orange, and the enormous navy one ahead of me. They are all massive, overshadowing the structure of the citadel as they narrow their golden eyes at us in absolute judgment." So that's their description. They're huge, huge, huge. They do seem really antagonistic a lot in their description. It's kind of like the How to Train Your Dragon vibes, with how the dragons are like, I'll deal with you, but I don't like you. And we do learn that the reasons that dragons tolerate humans is because they need humans to build wards. That combined magic through that signet allows them to build wards that help the dragons protect their ancestral like homeland where all of their nesting grounds are, and without humans they wouldn't be able to do that to protect them from the griffin riders and the griffins, which are evil, or so we think.
I mean, it's so the only like politics they actually do establish is that actually the dragon riders are just protecting their borders, which are magically created through wards and dragons. So that's the only politics we get, is that actually the dragon riders are like super chill and they're just like trying to defend their borders, which is like a good thing. And actually these griffin riders are bad because they attack us and they're not as cool as dragons. I don't know. The griffin riders are established and we already know because we've met Xaden and he's part of the rebellion, that and he's hot. He's so hot that clearly we're supposed to identify with them and not the status quo like her mom. But we're not given a lot to go on. So you're just like, all right, well, put a pin in that for when the author eventually gets around to it.
We honestly are not given a lot to go on in either direction. We aren't given a lot to go on in the direction of her mother. She should have been inundated with propaganda her whole life. That like Xaden is slowly like chipping away at, like, no, that's not true, or think about what that might mean, or but it doesn't actually do that ever anywhere, really, in any meaningful way. The next day, Dane tells the squad to go to class, but then pulls Violet aside and talks to her behind this pillar, so they're like secluded behind this pillar because he wants her to sneak out of the dragon quadrant and join the scribe quadrant because he doesn't believe she's strong enough to survive. When they walk out, she sees that Xaden is watching them from above on a balcony and he calls them out. And Violet is like, oh no, he wants to kill me. This is why he's watching me. And she freaks out and literally runs away like a dork. She has no game. It's so embarrassing. When it's totally obvious that Satan's like, oh my god, these two are so obviously fucking. And that's what he's calling them out for anyway, which is actually kind of funny. But I don't think it was intentionally funny. And this is another example of Violet really missing the point of someone saying something.
Yeah, I gotta say, she got that female protagonist syndrome where she cannot read her crush even a little bit because that would mean that they might move towards each other at a regular speed instead of slowly over the course of the book. I do have to say, though, I am very much a person who is incredible at reading people until I have a crush on that person. And I'm like, they can't enjoy spending time with me because they like me. It has to be some other reason, you know? So it's like, girl, same, but also like, girl, get over yourself.
But do you think, "Oh, no, they're trying to kill me?"
No, but I don't go to the murder war college where everyone dies for no reason, so
I understand the rebellion kids maybe wanting to kill her because her mother was in charge. Though there are these little paragraphs at the beginning of chapters that are like supposed to be historical texts, and it seems like her mother had more complicated feelings about the rebellion than what Violet believes.
So it's established early that everyone believes that Violet's mother gave the order to kill Zayden's father, and also that in this like little vignette that she specifically said that we shouldn't kill these people, and it's never really addressed, so you as a reader just have to like hold on to that because it doesn't affect her mother's characterization really at all, which is all over the place, and it doesn't really come up.
There's also a vignette where her mother is like quoted saying specifically that she doesn't believe that the children should be marked with relic marks, which are those tattoos. Yeah, it doesn't really, I assume it's addressed in a later book, but it isn't addressed here, and I kind of think it needs to be addressed a little bit more here instead of retconned in a different book.
Yeah, it's just a thread that hangs for the entire book.
Yeah. They go to Battle Brief, which is where they get the updates on the war front. We learn that the wards in a mountain outpost collapsed, which allowed for a griffin attack. And the professors in this setting, this is where everyone in the school is together in this scene. They're like all sitting, and the professors are asking them, well, what does this mean? What would you do in this situation? How would you respond to this? And this is seen as supposed to show that Violet and Xaden have really tactical minds. It doesn't really work, in my opinion. I think it like almost works, and I think it would have worked if it was backed up with later scenes of them showing that they have tactical minds in different scenarios. But in this scene, Violet says griffins don't do well at high altitude because they're half lion, half eagle. But they're half eagle. So why wouldn't they do well at high altitude?
It's foreshadowing so we can start sowing doubt about whether or not the Griffins are actually as bad as they are. But once again, because it's confusing logically, you're like, what? So it doesn't work.
Yeah. We go to a sparring ring where they're assessed for their skill. Jack snaps some random kid's neck, which they're not supposed to do. It's supposed to just be an assessment. They're not supposed to be able to kill anyone. He doesn't get in trouble for this. The professor's just like, hey, I said no lethal bouts. And that's literally, yeah, he doesn't even get a slap on the wrist. Rhiannon and Sawyer's another kid in her squad, they both say to her, like, oh, well, we'll help you learn combat if you help us with history, because Violet's really good at history. But she's terrible at fighting because she's so small and weak, which she says over and over again. She then has to spar with Imogen, who's a girl who is another rebellion kid who's a second year. And Imogen tries to stab her, hits the armored corset, and then she really brutally, and this is where that trigger warning for gruesome depictions of injury come in, she really brutally breaks the bones in Violet's arm and pulls her shoulder out of joint. And this was when I was thinking, like, I wonder how many of these kids have concussions. And I don't want to like make concussion like make light of concussions, and I don't want it to be like a joke, but this is something that I think books don't address enough, which is a concussion is really a serious injury. And there's no way that these kids don't all have concussions because they're breaking each other's bones, they're smacking each other in the faces. They all have brain damage from these concussions, and it's not addressed at all.
I didn't think about this at all. And I do actually, so I know people with traumatic brain injuries. So, and I know what that looks like on a person, and it is very dark. And in some ways, you can lose all sense of empathy. It can create completely different personalities. And it kind of is the only way that Jack Barlow makes sense is that he's had a horrifying traumatic brain injury that has just like dislocated his reasoning and emotions from the rest of his brain. So everyone having concussions actually does make a lot of sense in this book. But I don't want anyone to make light of your brain's important. Please don't hit it. Please be kind to people who have got hit in the brain. Brains are hard. I don't know.
If it's just an assessment thing, they should all be wearing those helmet things that like wrestlers wear to protect their heads from getting concussions. But they're not. This school doesn't make sense.
They have magic healing that they use very sparingly because I don't know. So maybe they're all getting their brains fixed or not.
Maybe. Dane rushes her to the healer's quarter and tries to convince her, don't have the magical healer, which is called a mender, heal you, because then you can sneak into the scribe's quadrant while you're healing, which is where you belong because you're so weak and tiny.
This is where they introduced magic healing, by the way. I mentioned it briefly, but yeah, this is where we're like, oh, there is magic healing. And they're like, but there's not a lot of it, so don't use it too much.
Yeah, and she's like, "No, mend me, dude." And the guy mends her arm, which I don't think he mends her completely. I think her arm is in a sling for a bit, which I do appreciate that the book does this. When someone like gets hurt, it seems like when they get hurt, their body is repairing for a while, which is realistic. And I did appreciate that. It wasn't like he completely fixed her. She's still really sore and her arm is still in a sling.
I would say it's 50% of the way there. It does seem to think that people are made of muscles and joints and ligaments and not just soft padding that if you stab a knife in it, it'll bleed a little bit, but then you'll be like back to normal. But it's like so close to understanding how bodies work, but then it can't go all the way because that would interfere with the story that it's telling. So instead, it still uses cartoony logic about injuries.
Yeah, and in some ways that makes it more frustrating than if it was just completely unrealistic. When she returns, she finds a book under her pillow that her sister had snuck in for her. Why her sister didn't just sneak this book into her bag, who knows? But she didn't. The book is a bunch of wisdom that her dead brother, Brennan, wrote while he was in training to become a writer. And her brother is also a mender, by the way, which everyone loves because mending is a really rare ability and it's really important. I can only think of Brennan Lee Mulligan whenever I hear the name Brennan now. So, like, that's who I picture when I think of her brother.
That's hilarious. I'm so sorry. I just not even there at all.
I don't know, it's, like, who I picture, and maybe he looks like that, I don't know. He's not described ever physically, so the book gives her information about how to figure out who you're going to be set to spar with so that you can prepare, because the professors figure it out beforehand, and then they, like, write it down somewhere, so she sneaks and, like, looks to see who she's gonna fight because she's like, "I'm so tiny and weak that I'll definitely be killed." Because for some reason, everyone at this war college wants to kill her instead of suck up to her, even though her mother is the general.
Even though her brother died in the field and the person who was trying to like heal him died trying to heal him to suck up to her mom. That's like a thing that they say.
Yeah.
But everyone's just always trying to kill Violet for whatever made up reason is happening right now.
Yeah, and it seems like it's not just because she's small, and I keep saying, "Oh, she's small and weak." These are Violet's words that she's like, "I'm so small and weak." I'm not like saying like, "Oh, she's too small and weak."
It's very Twilight, the way that she describes herself. I've recently been rereading Twilight with a similar group of friends, and I can tell you thoughts on that version. Like this is a very Bella inspired heroine where she's like, I'm so weak and clumsy and I can't do anything right. Aww.
But it doesn't seem like that's the reason that everyone wants to kill her. It seems that a lot of people, and not just the rebellion kids, it makes sense for the rebellion kids, but not just the rebellion kids want to kill her because of who her mother is. And that doesn't make sense to me. It's confusing to me.
I do think that in this book specifically, they do say that killing people because they are weak or small is a valid reason for murder. Jack specifically seems to just want to crush anything small. It's really like a 5-year-old brain, like, that's small, I want to hit it with a hammer. Because weakness is not tolerated in the army, because dragons don't tolerate weakness, because it's not clear. Like, I mean, it's understand why weakness wouldn't be tolerated, but it's just such a wildly reductive and minuscule understanding of strength and effectiveness in battle. It's quite strange that there's just people who were like, I want to hit it with a brick because it's small. And it's like, all right, there's this whole book is full of 5-year-old boys, mean 5-year-old boys.
I also think there's no way that she's that much smaller than the next shortest person. What is she, like 2 inches smaller than the next shortest person? Is everyone else 5'10" or taller, and she's the only one that's 5'0"?
I don't know.
It seems like she is so much shorter than and smaller than everyone else, and I just can't believe that that's true. I can believe that she is the shortest person, but I don't think that it's possible that she's that much shorter.
I mean, so a thing that I think I can totally understand based on context cues and put together, and that makes sense in this world to me, is that Violet spent almost all of her life believing that she was going to go into the scribe college. And this seems like a society where you career select pretty early. So she spent all of her time learning the Dewey Decimal System and I guess boning up on agricultural facts. And everybody else spent the time lifting and getting ready. So in that understanding, I can understand that these people have been training for years and that she's just like kind of like regular 18-year-old girl strong. And in that way, she's at a sort of a disadvantage. And then we do get later scenes, not in this section, but throughout where she's trying to catch up with people. So that makes a lot of sense. But they do make it sound like she's the smallest, littlest being that's ever existed.
Yeah. So anyway, Violet starts poisoning people.
Which is wild. This whole scene is supposed to be like street smarts over bronze, which is something they try to do a lot in the beginning of the book and it never really works. So she's like, I know what I'll do. I'm not strong enough. I'll outsmart them. And what I'll do is I'll poison everyone. And it's so buck wild.
Yeah, so she starts strategically poisoning the people who she's set to spar with the next day. She poisons them in different ways. Like she poisons one with psychedelic mushrooms so she can't walk in a straight line or something. But she only is poisoning the people she's set to spar with. And you'd think someone would figure this out, but no.
Everyone has concussions.
Maybe. While out one night, so she's like out collecting poison. She's up in a tree past curfew when all the rebellion kids congregate below that same tree, coincidentally, and chat about their classes. And we learn here that there's a rule that no more than 3 rebellion kids can be together at any given time. You have thoughts on this?
Oh, I thought it was a stupid rule. They're all in school together. Like, what do you mean they three? You made them all clump up and now you're mad about this. I should also say this scene was really boring. And I'd been driving up until this point and I just got switched off. So I was in the passenger seat and it was so boring. And she just spent basically so much of the book rejecting the call to adventure. We've really cut that out, but there's so much of her being like, I don't know, maybe I'm too weak and blah, 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 blah. Piss or get off the pot, you know? Become a dragon rider and try to do good or don't. I don't care. But anyway, so she's like up a tree and all this weird stuff is happening. I took a little car nap, y'all. I don't really know what happens in this scene. I woke up and they were like, I was like, is she still in the tree? And they're like, yeah, she's still in the tree. And I was like, all right, well, whatever. Nothing important could have happened.
Well, I'll explain what happened in the scene. And you made the good point. I thought this was a good point. We were talking about this earlier. So there's this rule that no more than 3 rebellion kids can be together at any given time. And there is like a magical reason for this that's revealed later in the book. But you were like, well, they bunk together. They're all in the same barracks together. And when they have battle brief, they're all in the same classroom together. And they take the same classes together. Like, how close do they have to be to each other in order for this to be the rule? If 5 of them are sitting next to each other or even near each other in the cafeteria, does that count? And that's a really good question. And it's not addressed because it does seem like they're always hanging out when they're at lunch or when they're in battle brief or when they're in like the sparring arena. There's a bunch of them. So it's kind of confusing. So she's thinking like, oh no, they're breaking the rule because all of them are here, even though no more than 3 of them are supposed to be together at any given time. And they're just kind of talking about school. And she's like, well, they're just kind of talking about school. And Zayden gives this really nihilist kind of speech. He's like, what do you all need? And this one first year kid's like, I want to go home. I don't want to be here. And he's like, well, maybe you should just go die, which is like, that's not helpful. This kid is obviously having some emotions, and maybe you should be a little kinder to him. So he's really nihilist about it and kind of dark. He also forbids anyone from hurting Violet, and Violet's like, because he wants to kill me himself. Immediately, instead of thinking like, that's kind of weird. They all leave. Violet climbs down. Zayden then grabs her and is like, I knew you were there. And she throws daggers at him, purposefully missing just enough that it doesn't hit him. And then she promises not to tell anyone about the gathering.
Can I just say, of course he knew she was there. She's just in a fucking tree.
With a huge cloak.
Like, what? She's not even in a bush.
And he is kind of nice to her in the scene. He like puts her daggers back in her sheaths and is kind of just talking to her. And it confuses her. She's like, this is some kind of scheme so he can kill me. And he's just talking to her.
She spends way too much time rejecting the call to adventure. She also spends way too much time being like, this dude's trying to kill me. And he's just like not killing her and being nice and like generally kind of a supportive squad leader or whatever. And she's like, it's all a trap for him to kill me. And it's like, girl, use 2 brain cells, rub them together.
Especially since there's another boy who is actively trying to kill her and is constantly screaming, I'm gonna kill you, Violet, who she doesn't think about when he's not in the same space as her yelling that at her. She doesn't think about him at all, but when she's alone, she's like, Zayden's gonna kill me. And it's like, there's someone who is actually trying to kill you, and you don't seem to be giving that any thought at all. Dane walks her to her breakfast duties the next day. He tells her to stay away from Jack because we, the readers, need to know that he is not actually a viable love interest and that he doesn't actually understand that she's not the problem here, it's Jack. She then poisons the kid's eggs. They have dragon biology class, and we get this absolutely massive info dump on dragons. So we learn here that dragons are color coded. We learn a little bit about their tails. So, like the dagger tails, the morning star tails. I don't know. It's like think of a weapon and there's a tail for it. Not a crossbow tail dragon. That would have been cool. But there is a scorpion tail dragon, which isn't really a weapon, but they are venomous. We learn that dragons can live after the bond ends with their rider, but their rider will die if their dragon dies, period. When they're using their signet, they can burn out and kill themselves through overusing their signet, which is what happened with Brennan. Another person tried to bring him back from the dead after he died, and they burned themselves out and died from it, and their dragon hasn't been seen since, and that dragon is the specialist black dragon with a morning star tail, so he's super powerful. Jack's like, that's the one I'm gonna get. And then you as the reader are like, I wonder if that's the one Violet's gonna get. Anyway, we also learned that the professor in this dragon class, his signet power is projecting images, and I like to think that it was like a projector from his eyes. When he blinked, it was like a chunk chunk, like the slide moving to show like a different thing. So that's just not neither here nor there, but that was his signet. And then afterwards, after class, this professor tells Violet that she's the smartest of her siblings and one of the smartest students he's ever had. She is not very smart, though. And I actually want to talk a little bit about Violet's intelligence since it's brought up in the book. So, there are different forms of intelligence, and this is something that the book, I think, in some ways understands and then in some ways completely misunderstands. It does create that dichotomy, like JoJo said earlier, of brains versus brawn, which in itself is two different forms of intelligence. So like we do have Rhiannon who says like I'm really good at physics, but I'm not good at history. And those are like two different kinds of, two different ways of using your brain. But Violet is really good at history. And of course Violet is good at history because the only thing that Violet seems to be good at and the only form of intelligence that Violet seems to possess is memorization. And memorization is a form of intelligence, but it kind of needs to go one step further, which she never really seems to take. And that is taking those things that you memorize, that information that you have absorbed, and applying it to new and different situations. And she does not do this well in any capacity. And there's really nothing that she's good at other than memorization. She's not good at reading other people's emotions or understanding her own. She doesn't have a tactical mind, even though the book tries to show this. She isn't funny, she isn't charming, she isn't sarcastic, she isn't stealthy or tricky or graceful. She is not observant. She misses really important information pretty consistently. She doesn't have a good understanding of her physical strengths or her physical limits, which is another important thing. And she is consistently unable to use her memorized facts to process and understand current obstacles that she is facing, and instead has to rely on other people to figure it out for her. And that is extremely frustrating as a reader.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I thought the way that they were gonna set up this character is that she spent all of this time being a scribe instead of training to be a dragon rider, and then she's gonna use all of that pre-scribe training to help her with her dragon writing thing. So I thought she was gonna do things like hit the books and like learn things, but there's absolutely no scenes of her doing any research to discover anything about the obstacles that she's trying to overcome other than, I mean, there's not even scenes of her like researching the poison. She's just like, I know all this poison stuff, which is like the closest it comes to like her using knowledge in the war college. I just think it would have there was so much potential for her, especially because we know that this whole book is a book that exists in a war college for other people to learn from. It would have been cool to see her doing research on other books to get a better understanding of things that people have done in the past. Research scenes are cool. Scenes of people going through paper and being like, aha,
Yeah.
those are really fun and cool scenes, and that could have been in this book,
Yeah.
and instead we don't get that.
There's that scene of Gandalf in Lord of the Rings Fellowship where he's in that library. That's super cool. There's the scene of Zhao in Avatar: The Last Airbender. They spend an entire episode in Avatar: The Last Airbender where they're in a library. There's that scene in Twilight where Bella is researching vampires. I love that scene in the movie where she's like really slowly scrolling across the Google page to click on something. Research scenes are cool.
I was gonna say there's a YouTuber I really like called Patrick H. Willem who's been going for a while, and he has a video that's all about how like document movies are cool, which are movies where people page through documents, which is sort of a little bit inspired my like understanding of this. They could have made her smart in a way that was interesting, and they didn't.
Yeah, and Dragon Prince Rohan is researching constantly, trying to figure things out. And that's really interesting. A book series that I also think shows different intelligence really well is the Stormlight Archives, which I know I talk about all the time on this podcast, but I think it bears repeating because it has pretty traditionally intelligent characters. Like Shallan is really intelligent. She's not good at fighting. She makes some incorrect statements and assumptions and comments that go too far, and she realizes it and has these moments where she's like, ooh, I didn't do that right. But she's really smart and she's portrayed as really witty. She's constantly making these quips. Yasna is also this really traditionally intelligent person where she's so book smart and she's really able to think through situations. And she's constantly chiding Shallan. She's like, you need to put your intelligence into your research and not into these clever quips that you're doing at people because what even is this? It's nothing. Yasna is very tactically minded, but she does often misread emotional cues from people and is often like described by other people as like cold-hearted or bitchy or something like that because of how her personality, and she's like a wonderful character. I love Yasna. And then we have Adolin, and Adolin even thinks he's dumb. He's like, I'm dumb, my girlfriend's smart, I'm dumb, but he's a beautiful tactical mind where he is a genius when he's fighting, and he's constantly like when he's fighting he's thinking about like, oh, I'm going to use this stance and I'm going to do this technique, and I hurt my leg so I have to do this, or that guy hurt his leg so he has to do this so I can do this, which is like a really beautiful way of describing like how he just has this different kind of intelligence than other people. And he's also incredibly kind, which is a form of emotional intelligence, and is able to do for people what they need in the moment and approach them in the way that they need. And like I could list every character and like how they exhibit their intelligence in that book, but that book is just so able to like look at the different ways that people have these different, first of all, different interests, different strengths, and different weaknesses, and how they are combined and work together. And Fourth Wing just doesn't doesn't do that at all.
Just to summarize this whole long nitpicky rant, which I just think it's a really valid criticism that this book creates a character whose defining feature, or one of her defining features, is that she's very smart, and then does absolutely nothing on the page to show us that she's smart. And in some ways, it just really feels like, I was going to say it feels like the writer is pissing on us and telling us it's writing, which is just way too harsh. But it does feel like we're being lied to and gaslit, and it's frustrating.
Yeah. So in the ring, Dane tells her that her opponent is going to kill her. And he's like, you need to be careful and blah, blah, blah. And then, like, in the background, Jack threatens her. And she immediately just is like, fuck you, and throws a dagger at him. And it, like, almost hits him. But of course, because she doesn't want to hurt anyone, it misses. But it gets close enough that it kind of makes him nervous. Which is great, and I kinda wish she would respond that way to Xaden too. If she thinks he's gonna, like, I guess she does throw some daggers at him in the previous scene, but she's so scared around Xaden, and she's so angry and, like, active around Jack, and it's like, "Well, why are you acting this way?" Like, Jack is overtly trying to kill you all the time, and you are not responding with fear at all.
I just have a different interpretation where she's like, "Oh my god, Zayden's so hot. I just blah, 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 blah. Oh, but he's trying to kill me, so I can't do it. But he's so hot." It's just like it doesn't come off at like she's scared. It comes off that he's trying to kill you. Put it away. Down girl, down girl. I don't find it as scared. I find it as weirdly horny. So
Maybe. Yeah, no one really notices this exchange that she has with Jack except for Dane, who's like, "You shouldn't have done that," and Xaden, who's like, "Good job."
yeah, it's like maybe illegal to throw daggers. I only say that because I just got to a scene where they say that it's sort of illegal to throw daggers. I don't know. The rules to this army and college where you sort of can kill people, but probably shouldn't, but also can totally legally do it. Even when you do illegally do it, it's fine. I hate every Matt scene. Every Matt scene is the worst scene in this book.
Yeah, we have this like montage of her like, I poisoned this person in this way, and this person in this way, and this person in this way, and she's really cocky about it, but then she does miscalculate a dose, and her opponent feels the effects of the poison too soon, and so is swapped out. And Zayden's like, well, I'll fight her instead. And she's like, oh no, it's time. He's gonna kill me now. And the professor is like, yes, this is a great pairing. Everyone watch carefully. This will be a good learning opportunity. And I have thoughts about this too.
Gather around, children. This first year is gonna get the shit kicked out of them by this third year. What a good show.
That's what it feels like. So, okay, this is bad pedagogy. Pedagogy is the philosophy of teaching. And I have a lot of questions. Number one, does this professor teach them anything? Because we never actually have a normal gym class where he like is explaining like this is how you hold your hand when you throw a punch. It just seems like one-on-one sparring matches every single day, which also doesn't make sense because war isn't always one-on-one sparring or matches, and it seems like from the descriptions we do get of these skirmishes that that's not the case anyway. Like in Alta, they have a whole scene where they make this fake dragon that they like put on strings, kind of like a mechanical bull, and they get the kids on it, and then they try to knock the kids off the back of the dragon to get them used to flying on the dragon. That is a scene in Alta. And it's a great scene. And this book doesn't have any of them like practicing riding a dragon before they actually get on a dragon, which doesn't make any sense. But like it seems like the only physical training they have is one-on-one sparring without any training on how to spar.
I mean, we've talked about this at length, so I've been trying not to put it into this. I do not know why hand to hand combat is a thing that you teach in dragon riding school even a little bit. It sort of makes sense if boarding was a thing. So in Temeraire, you can board other dragons, like pirate ships and stuff, and then you can like fight on the dragon to take over the dragon, which is so cool. It's so cool. Temeraire is also
So
is such a good
cool.
book. Yeah, Temeraire is such a good book. But they're gonna be riding on the backs of dragons and they're practicing only hand-to-hand combat, absolutely no ranged weapons. And I just don't understand even a little bit why any of these scenes needed to be in this book. It just seems like something that's not going to come up very often.
Yeah, and like Joust, they explain why they can't use arrows because dragons will like instinctually catch arrows, and you don't want to train your dragon not to catch arrows because it makes you vulnerable. And that's why they have to use jousting sticks instead of projectile weapons. But this book doesn't explain that either. And in Pern, they don't do any fighting training. But that's because their villain isn't human. It doesn't make sense. But like in the context of hand to hand fighting, there are also no weight classes at this school. When they're training, you would think that they put the smaller cadets with the smaller cadets so that they could start to learn how to fight each other. Or if there are no weight classes, then they really do need to have information on like, this is how you fight a larger opponent. This is how you fight a smaller opponent. And it's very obvious in the scene that they aren't taught that. And it doesn't make sense that this would be a good fight, which is what the professor says, and that people would learn from it. Because if you are the smallest person at the school and the weakest person, and you are put to fight the biggest, strongest person in the school, it's not going to teach you anything because you're going to lose immediately. And it's also not going to teach the other person anything because they're not going to be challenged at all. So it really doesn't make sense from a pedagogical standpoint. So Xaden and her fight, and Xaden immediately disarms her. He doesn't have any weapons and he pulls all of her daggers out. And in one part of the scene, Xaden grabs her from behind and traps her against his chest, so her back is to his chest. And I just assumed, I was like, yeah, she's gonna stomp his instep here, of course. Because as a woman, you're taught if you are grabbed from behind by a man, you're probably not gonna be able to get out of his hold by using your arms or like headbutting him back. That's not gonna be strong enough, but you can stomp his instep, and that usually gets them to release. But she doesn't do that. She does exactly what you're supposed to not do, where she tries to throw her head back against his chest.
It's just like every girl I know has had a self defense class, but this ain't it. Putting aside the fact that none of these match scenes, and there's so many of them in the book, should ever exist because it doesn't make sense to teach people who are mounted warriors how to do hand-to-hand combat. All of the like mat scenes have this weird sort of girl boss feminism in it where women are just as strong as men and they can do anything that men do, including wrestling each other. And I just want to like be there with you because I do think that as human beings there's not a lot of gender dimorphism between us. There's not a lot of difference between a man and a woman in the same way there is between like different peacocks, you know? But if you put someone that is 6'4" and 200 pounds, man or woman or whatever, against someone that's 5'0" and 100 pounds, physics doesn't make sense. There's nothing the smaller person can do hand to hand that would do anything. And it's not anti-feminist to say that different sizes have different effects.
Well, I think the thing is you just have to employ those tactics of stomping the instep, pulling the ear. Those things that you're taught in a women's self-defense class, which are a little bit more, I don't want to say they're underhanded in like a sparring ring setting, but like they're not something that you would do in a traditional boxing match. But they are something you'd probably do if you were on a battlefield and you were trying to fight for your life. So it makes sense if this is a sparring ring where you can use live weapons that are sharp, why wouldn't she try to actually hurt her opponent in order to not be killed, which she thinks he's going to do. She also thinks she's going to kill him here or kill her here. So you can girl boss in a way that actually makes sense. It would be so much cooler if she had a research scene where she found a book in the library that was like this smaller fighter was talking about how they had this very specific fighting technique and then she learned it in secret and then started employing these fighting techniques in the ring. And then people could still say like, "Oh, you're cheating, like these aren't the right, this isn't like an honorable way of fighting." But it would make more sense and then she would actually be like learning how to defend herself instead of just poisoning people. And like during this scene, Zayden's like, you need to stop poisoning people because that's not going to help you when you're actually in battle. And he's right. He is right in this scene where he says that to her. He's like, you need to actually learn how to defend yourself.
It's worth saying that he says that after he's pinned her to the ground and they're still fighting, even though he's totally like crushing her into the ground. They are crotch to crotch in this scene, by the way. That she's literally like, don't think about how he's between your legs and wriggling. And I was just like, the entire class is watching this. What's going on?
Yeah, instead of being fearful for her life, she is immensely turned on by the fact that he's basically dry humping her while he's giving her this advice and throwing all her daggers out of her. And then, like, he puts a dagger in her hand and then positions it at like different organs of his and is like, you stab here, while he's dry humping her. And like, no one is saying anything. The professor is like, I'm not going to address this, I guess. And maybe this happens all the time. I don't know. But I was just like, what's are doing here? Is he just like, I'm gonna walk away? It was so weird.
It is a scene where everyone is watching them that is very horny in a way that everybody looking had to be like, why are they humping each other? What? End the fight already.
Yeah, and so like he's completely pinned her to the mat. Why didn't the professor say, okay, tap out, she's pinned, you're done? He was just like, yeah, I'm gonna let this continue. It's so insane.
The professors in here in this entire book just exist to be like, hey, no, or hey, yes. I mean, I have a question for you. Do you think that all of these professors are just horribly broken down by like having to like teach all of these bright-eyed sociopathic children that keep literally and figuratively like running into buzzsaws and they just at this point they're just dead behind the eyes and they're in a dissociative state?
Yeah, they're facing some real faculty burnout right now, I think is what's happening. They're like overworked and they're tired of watching kids die and they're like, I'm gonna have to fail this other kid and I can't deal with it. I can't have another conversation about how to not snap someone's neck on the mat. They can figure it out for themselves. Or like don't dry hump someone on the mat. They can like just do it. It's fine. It's better than them snapping each other's necks. Which is it? I don't know, maybe.
That break room has to be insane.
Yeah, like all their stories. Maybe the professor was like, they're dry humping on this mat, but it seems consensual, so I'm gonna let it
I
slide.
was just gonna say, do you think they stock the fantasy weed that they mentioned later in the break room and they're all just like, "Ugh, two people died for no reason today. Ugh." Anyway, moving on.
I don't think these professors are smoking weed. I think they're like high on Ambien or something. They're on some like heavy Xanax anti-anxiety drugs that are like zonking them out, I
Yeah,
think.
they don't move very quickly to stop people from murdering each other, so
Yeah, maybe that's canonical. Like maybe they're just so depressed by watching all these kids die that they have to be on these like really intense antidepressants. Anyway, later that night, Dane massages Violet with her shirt off in his room, which is so weird. It's so weird. And he tells her to become a scribe. He's like, "You did well today. Anyway, you should become a scribe because he almost killed you." Even though he didn't.
he's like, you're doing great. You should once again reject the call to adventure. It's been a minute since I said that, but we should really grind the gears of this book to a halt so we could do this again.
Yeah, she gets mad because he can't have a conversation with her without calling her weak, and like weak is a real trigger word for her. And I think that's valid. He does really suck. He then touches her face again, which she thinks nothing of. And I do have to ask you, do you think when he touched her face, what do you think he was annoyed that she had been turned on by Zayden earlier? Because I really think this man is a voyeur. Like, I think that's why he's touching her face. He's like, is she being turned on by this?
Here's the thing is there's so many things in this book where I can't get over the first stumbling block that it's really hard to make it forward. I just can't get over how much face touching there is. This is too much face touching. How is she still letting him touch his face?
Especially when she's mad at him.
Yeah.
She's mad at him. She still lets him touch her. Don't. Maybe that's like victim blamey. But like, you'd think she'd be like, stop fucking touching me, Dane.
Yeah, I mean, she still sort of likes him at this point, even though she's cooling on him. One of the things that I like about this book, and we've talked about this, but it's probably not going to be too much in the review because most of it's going to be in the next part, which is that, like, I do actually like the message of who they're saying is a good romantic partner for Violet. Dane is constantly undermining her and trying to protect her because he can't watch her get hurt. And it's all about him and his protectiveness, which in other romance books is always like, oh man, he just can't see me get hurt. That's like so romantic. I love him so much. But in this book, it's like, no, that's really controlling and weird. And it's all about him and not at all about her and what she wants. I thought Dane was going to be more of a romantic interest, like really early in the book. And I was like, oh, he sucks so much. But actually, the book tells you, actually, this behavior sucks and is not good. And the only reason she still talks to him is because they have literally a decade or more of relationship between them. And he's practically family. And it's really hard to cut people out of your lives in that way. I just think that this relationship in this book is really well done in a way that is complex and interesting. And then also, I mean, I feel like the notion of like a healthy relationship and a romance is something that is held up as a good thing for a book to have when I don't necessarily think that's true. I think stories can depict healthy and unhealthy romances and relationships, and both can be valid things for a book to show. But just personally, I really liked that Dane is a massive control freak and Violet is like, ooh, get away.
I think that everything you said is valid, except that Xaden is extremely controlling over her safety in the second half of the book. It kind of undermines that message.
I agree completely, and we will talk about it later.
Yeah. All right. So here's where we learn that it has been 2 months and a fourth of all of the first years are already dead. So that's how many people have died so far, which is an incredibly high number. I think there were like 100 to start or something. And I wonder how many got killed. I have to ask. Like, how many?
I'll make maybe like one every week or so. I know we said we wouldn't talk about how annoying the amount of deaths are, but it is too many.
They are then introduced to the gauntlet, which is the American Ninja Warrior thing, but fantasy style, which I talked about earlier.
Yeah, as someone who's watched a lot of American Ninja Warrior, it's American Ninja Warrior. They have a warped wall.
Complete with a warped wall. Tynan, who is another person on their squad who we really haven't talked about because he really hasn't been in the book, he is annoyed at Violet. He's like, you're too weak. He makes a bunch of snipes at her. Riddick, who's another person on their squad who I guess I also haven't talked about, but is a bigger character and is JoJo's favorite character, does defend her.
I like Riddick so much. He's dumb. He's queer. He does absolutely nothing in this book but support Rion and Violet, and he's just a dumb bro with good vibes. I did honestly forget about him in the pause I took in this book because he gets a little bit supplanted later in the book with Liam, who is
Yeah.
also a puppy dog.
Riddick is kind of like he'll call you out on your bullshit, where Liam is kind of like nice boy, will not call you out on your bullshit, but will kind of bring up in the kindest way possible to perhaps act differently. Anyway, the professor who's standing right next to them ignores all of this sniping, even though it continues for a really long time, and you're not supposed to kill anyone in your squad, and Tynan is basically making death threats. They start practicing, and Arlie, who is also pretty much introduced in this scene, immediately dies. She doesn't really get any characterization. And this is again that example of someone brought in. She's like, oh, I love this. I love the gauntlet. I'm so excited. And then she like immediately dies. Later, Violet takes her things up to be burned because they have this religious practice where they burn the person's possessions after they die. And because of this, she does miss curfew. On her way back through the campus, she sees Xaden coming with two of his rebellion kids, who one's name is Garrick and the other's name is Bodhi. And she's like, where are they coming back from? Sneaky, sneaky. And Xaden notices her after he says goodbye to his friends. And he tells her that he sees her because he sees what the shadows see. Oh, and his signet is shadows. He can control shadows. Which I'm like, does he see everything?
It's not clear. It's sort of magic. I do want to just briefly talk about, we don't talk about this a lot, but the religion around death, the whole book is like real nonchalant about death. And like when a character dies, they just basically like forget about them. They're like, well, he's in Malik now, and then they move on.
You're not allowed to keep anything of your dead relatives. So the fact that she has this book that her brother wrote is actually heretical. Like she's not supposed to have that. While she's talking to Zayden, they talk about Hope, and he is really edgelord in this scene. He's such a fucking edgelord. And then she asks him whether or not he's going to kill her, and he's like, maybe, I don't know. And then he's like, there's more than one way up the gauntlet. The right way isn't the only way. And he like gives her that little hint, which she then uses. They continue practicing. Violet doesn't make literally any progress, which is so annoying.
She can do like parts of it. So you do see her get like slightly better at, but she can't get up the warped wall. I mean, this is something that we've talked about, and talked about earlier in this podcast, which is like if this was a better book, we would see Violet using like her big brain to hit the library and figure out how to climb up the wall. But instead we just have a lot of wasted time of her just worrying and people saying that she can't do it and Ruth being like, I can't do it. And then like this goes on for a while. And then like the day of, she's just like, I got it. And then as a reader, you're like, okay, well, what'd you figure out? And then they don't tell you that because they want to wait until the scene comes so you can see it in media res, which I think is not a terrible way of creating tension and then paying it off, which is, I think, a real struggle in this book. This book really struggles to create tension because it creates such nonsensical situations that you're like kind of confused as to why there should be tension anyway. And another way that it does it is it says a thing is a problem and then doesn't give you an answer until eventually you need to solve it within a scene. And I just don't think it works because it's never really anything interesting that she comes up with in the end or like an intelligent or interesting way of doing things. It's just really heavy-handed, so it's a lot of worrying, and then she basically does the plot equivalent of hitting it with a hammer and fixing the problem that way by like brute forcing it or whatever, and it just really doesn't pay off, and it really frustrated me.
Yeah, I think it would also have worked if she is making progress in the gauntlet, but then is still just maybe like the first day she couldn't even get close to the top, but maybe on the last day her fingers are like kind of brushing the top and she's like, I'm almost there, but I just, if I had like 2 more weeks, I would have been able to get it. So I need to figure out a different solution. So you feel like progress is being made, and then she has to do a right turn and figure out her own way. That would have also worked better, but that's not really how this book works. The day comes, Dane tries to get her to quit again. She refuses. Then she is able to use one of the guide ropes to climb up this other obstacle that gives her problems. There are these like guide ropes that you can hold onto if you slip. And then she stabs her daggers into the warped wall and so that she can climb up. She's accused of cheating when she makes it to the top by a different wing leader and is able to argue because the codex says that everything that you bring through the parapet is considered part of your person. The daggers she used were the daggers she brought across the parapet, so she is only using her person because you're not really allowed to use other things to get through the gauntlet. And this is the only time in the book I think we see her actually using her knowledge in a new situation.
She's just rules lawyering, like she's regurgitating a bunch of rules. And we just have seen people illegally murder people in this school with nothing happening other than a stern talking to. So anytime people were like, hey, that's against the rules, I'm like, murder's fucking legal in this school. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah, like where were you when this person was murdered? Were you like saying, hey, that's against the rules? Or were you like, meh, in that case, it's fine? It's so contrived when someone decides to make a point of something like that.
I think there's a really interesting thing you could say about power dynamics and rules only mattering based on wielding power. I think we're going to talk about Joust and Ulta till we die because they're so much better than basically everything we read. But there's an incredible scene in Joust where we see different people using the law to try to get their own means, but in reality, it's all a power play, and the person with power makes the ultimate decision. You see them basically exerting power through laws. So you could do something interesting with that, but it's really just, that's not how it works.
I don't think that's what this book was trying to do. Maybe it was, but if it was, it doesn't successfully do it. Xaden defends her and says it's okay because he's her love interest. And then they all walk to the procession and present themselves to the dragons, where they're walking through this canyon and all the dragons are lined up on either side of the canyon walls to look at them and can incinerate anyone they think is unfit to be a rider. They're also told to talk to each other, and they interpret this as sniping at each other for the entire hike. So that was really annoying to read. They see a feather tail at the very end of all these dragons, which is so obviously a baby dragon, and none of them can figure that one out. And a few of the squad members in front of this dragon and other dragons are like, "Ugh, it's weak. We need to. It's disgusting to me because it's so weak." Which is like, what are you doing? Why are you acting this way?
I do have to say that I did not put together that the Feathertail was a baby dragon, mostly because I think the scene goes on way too long. And at that point, I was like, whatever, it's another dragon. Like, please do something. The scene is going, they've been walking for miles.
Yeah, on the way back, two of the squad members get scorched, but don't worry, it's no one that we have spent any time with, so doesn't matter.
Yeah, they like introduce this bitchy woman character that you hate, and then they also introduce a scared guy who you also hate, and then they fucking barbecue them in front of people once again to like create tension and stakes that don't matter because you already fucking hate these people because they're written in such a flimsy way.
They also aren't really in the text. It would be different if maybe the scared guy was scared, but he was really close with Violet and he helped Violet figure out something like in a different sense, or like he, taught her how to throw a punch, or like gave her an apple, or I don't know, like did something nice to her. So she's like, I like this guy, even though he probably isn't Dragon Rider material. Or if the mean girl was really more in the story and was really mean to Violet, but was really favored by a lot of people. So you're like, oh, like she's probably going to get a dragon. And then she gets scorched and you're like, oh shit, the rules seem to be different than we think they are, kind of thing. But they're just so not in the story that you're like, who? 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 And then they're gone.
This book really likes to make up a straw man to then immediately light on fire.
Yeah, literally. And then two dragons come up and sniff Violet's nasty ass corset that she never washes. I know she does wash it on page, but she doesn't wash it very often because it's made out of dragon scales and they recognize the dragon that the scales belong to. And she's like, oh, it's my sister dragon, blah, blah, blah. And she talks to them.
There's so little dragons in this book that this was delightful and a really cute scene. And also, so much of this book is like dragons are scary and evil and will kill you on sight. But like some of them are really cute.
And don't care.
Yeah.
And also don't care about anyone except their bonded rider. But obviously, like, that's not the case. They were so gentle with her. And the other people in her squad while they were, like, they could have smushed them, but they didn't.
Yeah. It's a very cute scene and also confuses everything we've heard about dragons.
But Violet doesn't use this opportunity to think, maybe dragons are a little bit more nuanced and complex than we think they are. She doesn't think about that because she doesn't think. The next day, they're released into a forest to find their dragons. They have to do it alone. Violet wanders around aimlessly. She's unable to connect with any of the dragons she sees. She says she's seen every color of dragon by now, but she hasn't really connected to any one of them. And it's described as it's something that you intrinsically feel. But she's like, well, I don't really feel anything. She then sees Jack, Orin, and Tynan talking about how they want to kill the golden dragon. And so she's like, oh no, I need to save the golden dragon so they don't kill it.
Yeah, basically the villains of the book, some of whom have been Jack, who's been overexposed, and some of them who have been less exposed, are like, we're gonna murder a dragon. She's like, shit, shit, shit. We shouldn't let them murder the small feathertail dragon because they just want to kill him because it's small, which is a motivating factor for a lot of people, which is so weird. But anyway, she like finds the feathertail first and is like, shoo, shoo, go away, you gotta run. There's a bunch of sociopaths with big, like with tiny brains and they want to kill you. And then the dragon is like, I'm so sorry, I can't leave yet for plot reasons. I'm gonna have to stick right here. And you're like, oh my God.
Yeah, so she decides to defend it. She tells the boys to fuck off. They don't listen. And then Xaden, who's watching from the shadows, tells them that he's like, it's a bad idea to do that.
Yeah, Xaden shows up.
Yeah. All of the like older students are watching them, but they can't interfere. So like this is when like the kids can kill each other with impunity if they want, because there are fewer dragons than people to bond. So if you don't bond the dragon, you have the chance to retake your first year, which would happen. That happened to Sawyer the year before, so he should be a second year, but he's not because he didn't bond a dragon. So Xaden can watch, but he can't interfere. She fights them. She hits Jack in the shoulder with a dagger and he runs away. Orin gets knocked out, and then a dragon appears and roasts Tynan alive and kills him. He tells Violet to get on his back, but she's too small, she can't. And this is the big black dragon with the morning star tail that they were talking about in that professor's class. And he leans down for her, which is apparently unheard of. They take off and she immediately falls off his back. He catches her, and then as they fly, she like watches another rider fall to their death. But she's like totally fine when he catches her. And in Alta, Ari falls off his dragon and is caught by Akaten's dragon. And he lands crotch first, which is how she's just described as landing.
I thought he catches her in her feet and she's just like carrying her in his like little claws.
No, then he like throws her so then she lands back on his back.
Oh, okay.
And Ari is in so much pain that he's like screaming, and they have to like heal him with magic once they land. And I know that she is not a man and she doesn't have balls, but it would still hurt so much to be thrown and then land onto a giant dragon crotch first on a hard scaly back.
This is a thing that I have an issue with a lot of books, which is like like nobody takes any falling damage, you know? People die falling from 7 feet, you know? People
Yeah.
There's a baseball game where somebody fell 20 or 30 feet and everybody thought he was going to die. If you get thrown from a paw into the air and land, even if it's more than like scooting across, that'll break all your bones.
Or at least knock the wind out of you.
Yeah, nobody understands how falling works. Once again, this book is almost close to understanding how bodies work. Violet hits Jack with a dagger in the shoulder, like we said, and it tears the ligament and his arm stops working. I was like, finally, someone takes a shoulder wound and it's not just, oh no, I'm bleeding a little bit. Like, it's no, there's fucking tendons in there that can get snapped and have real importance. And then you just see someone fall like 30 feet and be like, ouch. And you're like, all right, whatever.
Yeah, it's also strange because she twists and pops her joints out of place constantly and has a health condition that causes that to happen more easily, but this doesn't seem to affect her at all. Like you'd think it would. And then it would be an interesting thing with her dragon where he's like, oh, I guess I need to be more careful with that.
Just to like bounce off of that, we didn't even mention this. She starts off this fight by catching her foot on a tree branch and dislocating her ankle, and then she starts the fight.
I totally forgot about that.
I only remember it because one of the my friend who has a hypermobility disorder that was also in the car was with me had also recently very randomly twisted her ankle. So when we got to that, because we'd been bouncing back and forth about like, as two people with hypermobility disorder, does this ring true to us? And that happening, it was very much like, yep, that I understand, just accidentally putting a foot wrong and hurting yourself. And like, that's a part of it, but God, there's so much stupid stuff around it. There's like so much stuff where this is a thing I recognize in a pile of ununderstandable mush that I don't understand, and I don't know how another human being could interact with this. And I think that's what in some way maybe drives some of the tension and enjoyment about the book, because there is, just like Xaden's eyes, specks of gold in this book that is really interesting and entertaining and like trying to do new things and trying to, you know, have a different type of female protagonist, but like a different type of story. And like some of it is realistic and interesting, but like just like Xaden eyes, most of it is like a black hole at which no logic or understanding will ever come out of. There's a lot to talk about in this book. I understand why people are engaging with it.
Yeah, so anyway, they land on the flight field and she goes to the rules to tell them her dragon's name and get signed up and certified. And her dragon's name is Taryn. He has a longer name. All dragons have like a longer name and then a shorter name that they call them. The book, even in her brain, she doesn't call him by his full name, so I'm just going to call him Taryn. The golden dragon also speaks in her mind and tells her that her name is Andarna. And the command is like, 2 dragons? No one has ever bonded 2 dragons before. And they're like, we don't know if this is allowed. So then the command is like, well, dragons are actually the ones in control, so we can't do anything about this. And then the dragons are like, we need to hold a quorum to decide whether or not this is allowed.
Violet can't fucking win in this book. Like, she does something cool and amazing that no one's ever done before, and everyone's like, ew, she's got 2 dragons. That's like kind of weird and gross. Even her mom shows up and she's like, her mom, who is vindicated in this moment, her mom who pushed her despite what everybody else expected her to do, to become a dragon rider, to live up to the family legacy. And not only does she that, she excels. She doesn't bond one dragon, she bonds two dragon. And her mom is like, so embarrassing.
Also, the dragon she bonds one of the dragons is the Feathertail, but the other one is the second largest dragon alive right now. One of the best dragons in the world, and the only one that is bigger and better is the top general's dragon. So, like, she has the biggest, bestest dragon possible, too.
And people are like weird about it and like don't give her any credit for it. I understand that you want to write a story about someone who nobody believes in and finds success in her own way, but that's not the story you wrote. Like people should be fucking lining up to like sing her praises.
I think also this would have been a much more interesting scene if perhaps the other generals were like, "That's not allowed, you can't do that, this isn't a thing." And her mom was like, "The fuck it isn't, this is my daughter." And then like defends her and is it proud of her in that moment. And then Violet has this moment where she's like, "I think this is the first time my mom has ever been proud of me." And then she can feel conflicted where she's like, this is like, my mom was only proud of me when I am someone who I'm not, right? Like when I am like her, and like it could have been like a different kind of tension, but it's not. Instead, the author chose to make an inconsistent character choice for her mother. Tyron tells her to stay near Xaden while the dragons hold a quorum to decide whether or not this is okay. And she's like, "Xaden, why Xaden?" And then Dane grabs her arm and is like, "What happened?" And tells her that she should pick the little dragon. He's like, "You need to pick the little dragon because then you won't be able to fight." And also, the big dragon is bonded to Xaden's dragon, so he's gonna kill you. And then Xaden appears. He and Dane fight whenever they're together, which is kind of funny. And he's like, "Would you have saved her?" And he gets Dane to admit that he wouldn't have helped her in the fight with the boys. And Dane then leaves in a huff.
There's a lot in this book about people following the rules versus not following the rules, and like the cool people are the people who rebel, and just the fact that the rules are so amicable makes it really hard for me to be emotionally invested in this book. I just find the inconsistencies make the stakes so nebulous and weird, where it's like Dane follows the rule and Xaden doesn't, and it's like, okay, well, rules are mostly murdering people, so maybe it's a good thing or not a good thing. The book really wants you to be like, people who follow the rules are boring and aren't fun, and like stop people who don't fit into like pretty little boxes be able to like survive in this world, and it's important to rebel. But then it's also people are extrajudicially murdering each other, the rules aren't consistent.
I think that this dichotomy exists because it's slowly showing Violet that the rules are not in place to protect them and is slowly causing her to turn towards Xaden, who's like, "The rules are meant to control us, not protect us. Let me show you the truth. Let me show you the matrix," kind of thing. Where Xaden's like, "We follow the rules, we climb the ranks, we get the power, we do the thing, we end the war." And he has this really idealistic view that's been, the propaganda has taught him his whole life, where Xaden is, clear-eyed. And so she's learning through Dane's actions that she's like, the rules aren't here to protect us and instead are here to control us. I think that's what it's trying to show. It would be nice if she learned this not through two boys that she wants to fuck.
Okay, I just thought what it was that it was trying to play off of a lot of pre-existing themes and understandings of cool people rebel, squares follow the rules, try to play with those tropes and ideas.
I think it's doing that too.
I just found it a little bit frustrating because murder is legal. I just can't get over that. I know we're supposed to.
So Dane leaves in a huff. Xaden's like, "Our dragons are mates, so if you die, I might die because it'll create a chain reaction where you'll die, Taryn will die, his dragon, whose name is Scale, will die, and then he'll die because she died." Which, sure. He also tells her that other people are going to try to kill her to get to Taryn while her bond is still weak, which really doesn't make any sense. The dragons then decide that it's fine and she can have two dragons. And they give all the dragons dragon riders these rad tattoos to mark their bond, and also as like a conduit for their powers. And then Dane kisses Violet, and she feels nothing. And she's like, I felt nothing. And that's where we're gonna end it for today.
I just think this is a really good stopping point because the central conflict of the book really like changes here. So for the first part of this book, the conflict is all about Violet trying to get her dragon before either the school or her enemies, the fellow students, kill her, or I guess her loved ones stick her in a library for the rest of her life. So it's like all about Violet trying to become a dragon rider. And then now she is a dragon rider. After she gets the dragon, there's an immediately new different conflict that's based around Violet and Xaden. So instead of her being like, he's gonna kill me, now he can't kill her. So they can't be enemies anymore. They have to be frenemies, I guess. So that's the new central conflict of the book, is that like Violet can't die because then Taryn will die and everyone else will die. And we find out almost immediately after this that everyone who didn't bond a dragon now wants to kill her so they can get her dragon, because if a dragon rider dies while they're still in training, they might just pick someone who's right over there, I guess. Which doesn't really make any sense because Taryn's gonna die if she dies. So if they kill her, they'll kill him so they can't get him. A lot of writers die from their dragon's indifference, but like not Taryn, because I guess he's not one of those girls. Anyway, this is the driving point of the plot moving forward. So it makes sense to pause here because the book's about to change.
I think it would have been more interesting if Zayden came up to her and was like, hey, our dragons are bonded, so this chain reaction thing can happen. Everyone wants to kill me because of who my father is. And they know that I'm a bad target because I'm really strong and powerful and the biggest boy. But they know how weak you are, so they're all going to try to kill you to get to me. So we're going to try to protect you. Like, that would have made more sense. But that's not what it is.
Yeah, it would not have a logical fallacy at the center of it.
Honestly, like, I kind of think that the book should have been split in two, where this next part was the second book, and then this first book would have had, because really, she and Xaden don't interact that much in this book at all, even in the second part.
I was gonna say they rub crotches together a couple of times, and he's like, "I'm gonna protect you," and she's like, "Oh my god, he's trying to kill me." But like, yeah, they don't talk
Yeah, and
much.
it would make more sense if this was like a whole book and they were like slowly kind of getting to know each other. And maybe those boundaries that they were placing were starting to break down, where she's like, oh, actually, he's really funny. Or, oh, I really like that he, I don't know, like some small part about his personality, or maybe he has a vocal tick, or like maybe he has I don't know, like something about his personality that isn't just, oh, he's a sexy, sexy man. That she's starting to like realize, like, oh, he's really actually has like a softer side, or I understand more about why he acts this way. But the book doesn't allow there to be that space where she has that time with him. So it really just makes their relationship that is going to come to a head in the second part just feel just physical, which is kind of cheap.
There are scenes where she sees him being kind to people who are weaker than her, and you would think that that would be like, oh, that's hot. Instead, she's like, this is a trick.
Yeah.
It's because they need to do an enemies to lovers thing, because that is the hottest thing right now. I literally went to a convention and that was the hottest thing at the convention. Because that's the hottest trope right now, they need to start out as enemies and then move to lovers. But there's just not an we talked about this off mic about books that make people enemies to lovers, but they don't really know how to make them enemies to lovers. So it's just like a bunch of real weird plot contrivances until they have their first adult conversation. This really feels the same way.
Yeah, I do like when people are enemies because of character flaws within the people that are causing them to like have different opinion, kind of maybe in some ways unfair assumptions or opinions towards each other. But I think the miscommunication in this book is awful. And I think that that character flaw and miscommunication can sometimes be conflated to be the same thing, and those two things are very different, and it's not really approached as in this is Violet's prejudice or character flaw. Like Pride and Prejudice, perfect example of what I'm talking about, where like they're enemies to lovers because of their character flaws and they have to grow as people separately in order to come together as a couple, and that almost never happens in these kinds of books, and so it doesn't work, and that doesn't happen in this book either. And I know that that's a really specific example, and I think it can be done well. I think this book is not enemies to lovers. I know, like, people have talked about this at length about how this is an enemies to lovers who have so much more experience reading these kinds of books than I do, so I'm not even gonna tread into that territory. You can listen to those people talk about it. They have much more to say in a much eloquent way. What we're gonna talk about right now is the dragons.
Before we move on, I just want to say I do think that I'm being ungenerous to this book in a way that I was hoping not to be, but I just find some of these flaws to be fatal, in my opinion. Saying that she's smart and then never showing it, allowing people to murder people and then pretending that rules are important. The fact that all of these characters are so flimsy that it makes it difficult to get an understanding of their motivations so you can feel what's going on in a scene. It makes it difficult to be able to understand a scene because it's inconsistent with what you've seen before. So when someone says something, it feels sometimes disingenuous, even if it's genuine in the scene. I just have a lot of problems with the construction of this book that makes it hard for me to buy into the fiction in a way that I was able to do in Priory of the Orange Tree, which I think has a lot of flaws, but stronger characterization and stronger world building. So it makes it feel easier to invest in the world and then forgive all of the plot contrivances stuff because it's for a larger story that I understand where it's going to. And in this one, I just don't know where it's going to or why I should care about it.
Yeah, I think Priory of the Orange Tree is objectively a better book because I think that Priory of the Orange Tree, like, we talked at length about the flaws that are in it, and those flaws are lack of foreshadowing. There are a lot of plot contrivances, but the character relationships, when they are done well, are done really, really well. Relationship between Eid and Sabran is beautiful. It's just absolutely beautiful and really lovely. Feelings of betrayal happen in really interesting ways. That scene with Tane and her dragon in the end of the book is so beautiful. But Fourth Wing falls, I think, into the trap that so much fantasy romance falls into, which is that it builds so almost everything is a plot contrivance because the only point of the book is to get the two characters to kiss against all better judgment, and it could just have been done so much better. And there are some things in the book that I think could have been done so easily. Like, instead of Violet not wanting to enter the Dragon Riders quadrant and her mom forcing her to, what if it was just the opposite? Where she was like, I've been trained as a scribe for my whole life, but I want to be a dragon rider. Even though I'm small and people say I'm weak, I'm ready, I can do it. And her mom's like, absolutely not, you're not doing it. But then she has no say once she's past the parapet. And then it would make more sense when her mother is upset that she bonded two dragons. That would have been the easiest thing in the world to do. And you could still have had Dane saying, like, you need to enter the scribes quadrant. Nothing else would change other than this one switch in the plot. And it would make the whole system make more sense. And then, like, just give us one scene of her doing research on Paige where she's learning something. Have her employ some of these smaller person fighting tactics against Zayden and them not working because he is so strong and powerful. It's things like that that could have worked. And I'm using examples specifically from Fourth Wing, but I think that a lot of romance novels do fall into this trap where it all is contrivance, built on contrivance, built on contrivance, when it could have been cooler and it could have been great and you could have had some real world building that really makes it feel like I understand why these characters can't be together even though they have this attraction.
I just also, and I've been thinking about this as we've been talking, and I think part of my problem is that the stakes in every scene is that someone is going to kill Violet, unless she's about to kiss a boy or thinking about a boy. So the book starts at 11 and then just stays at 11 the whole time. And it really burns you out because there's no place to grow in it. As soon as she isn't going to die because she's too weak to be a dragon rider, then immediately now she's going to die because she is a dragon rider. There's almost no scenes of them kind of like hanging out and like being friends and learning. And I think that's why we harp on the learning scenes is we just need a scene that's not about how people are going to kill her or she's about to die. We just need some other thing in this book to make it more than one note.
We could have gotten a really lovely scene with her and Rhiannon and Sawyer where Sawyer and Rhiannon are trying to show her how to fight, and it doesn't work because Sawyer and Rhiannon are both much bigger than she is. So their methods of fighting don't really work for her. Or maybe they accidentally hurt her because she has that joint issue and she has that connective tissue issue. And be like a really interesting character building moment where her friends are like, oh, we realize like how much help you need, or not help, but like we really need to come at this at a different angle, and like you really just need a really different approach when learning how to do this thing because your body works differently. And that could have been really interesting where they figure it out together, or maybe they don't. And she's like, I am realizing that I'm the one that needs to figure this out because I have a different need than other people. And so then she has to figure it out herself. And that struggle could be there. And that would be really interesting.
I just needed a scene that wasn't about her dying.
Or wanting to fuck someone.
Yeah, just literally a different scene would have been better. And I think that's why I'm so burnt out about this. So, anyway, dragons.
Yeah. So, as we said before, there are a few tropes. The dragons are color coded for your convenience. The dragons grant magical powers to their riders, though in this book it is a little different. They have the small magics like the pens, and they can lock doors or something. But then they have like a specific special power, like in X-Men, where they can breathe underwater or command shadows or something. Where like in Aragon, he has wizard magic, where he can do all kinds of magic through spells and things because that magic is granted to him by his connection to Saphira. So here we have a more individualized look at that. And then that physical manifestation of the bond through the tattoo. So they have that like magical tattoo, and in Aragon, he has a scar on his hand. And in the Summer Dragon, they get tattoos to strengthen that bond between human and rider. That is like a magical tattoo, but it's just a little different way of looking at it, which is quite interesting and lovely. So we have those three. But otherwise, I think it is interesting that the dragons and humans have that more antagonistic relationship where the dragons only really have need of the humans for this one specific reason and are pretty distrustful of humans otherwise, which is again what we see in How to Train Your Dragon, where the dragons are actively kind of struggling against humans even though they still obey them. But I don't believe that the bond is really described well, and this is something that I think is kind of goes forward throughout the book too, where once the bond snaps into place in other books, we get this really emotional experience in the writer's mind coming together with the dragons, and where does the one end and one begin, and how wonderful that is, or how violent that is, or how difficult that is to really understand at first, and how like orienting that is. But Violet seems surprised when Tarn tells her to get on his back. She's like, "Oh, me? Who? Me? Who? Me?" And like it kind of just again like furthers my theory that she cannot read people's emotions, which I don't think is intentional by the author at all. But like she just like misinterprets people's emotions and like people's responses to her constantly. And we do get a later scene where Rhiannon says that like she just knew. And she has this kind of starry-eyed look in her face and she's like, I just knew when I just saw that green dragon that it's the one I wanted. But Violet doesn't have any of that. Other than when the dragons are having their little quorum, she's thinking like, there was an expanding to my mind that is not there anymore when they like cut themselves off from the bond so they can talk. And I would have liked more of that. And it's kind of disappointing that that's not there because it's always really lovely when it's described in these books.
It kind of stepped on its own plot because they wanted the surprise of it, which is sort of how I felt about when she solves a problem. They want the surprise of like, and then the bond's there, but they don't give us the scene of it happening, and it's like,
This is in first person.
yeah, just let her experience this stuff.
Yeah.
I also thought the first flight is a thing in Dragon Riders, and it's usually this beautiful, euphoric experience, or in some ways it's Aragon's was a little traumatic, and then he has like his like real first flight, and it was much more beautiful. And this one just was she like got thrown around like a sack of potatoes.
Yeah, and Joust, his first flight is terrifying, but there are a lot of reasons why it's terrifying. And it's also beautiful and it's so heartbreaking and that book is so good.
It's so well written too. The writing is different and shorter sentences to really drive home that it's like an energetic scene. And she's just like, I can't get on. He's like, I stick my leggy out real long so you can climb it. And then she's like, I can't hold on. And then he's like, you should try it. And then she's like, I'm falling to my death. And he's like, scoop you up, potato sack, put you down. You own me now. And then she's like, okay.
Yeah, the whole relationship between humans and dragons is really strange because we're actually shown this. Whenever a human who has bonded a dragon talks about their dragon, they get this really lovey look in their eyes, and they really seem to love their dragons once they're bonded to them. And the dragons
What's the quote that exists like that is in every Etsy shot. It's like a dragon without a rider.
Is a tragedy. A rider without a dragon is dead.
Yeah, you really don't get that from this book because it does seem like if they die, you die, but also it seems like if you fall off their back because they're flying too fast and they haven't invented harnesses in this world, the dragon is like, "Well, more where that came from."
Oh shoot, I killed another one. Yeah,
Unless you're tarred, and then if you die, then I die.
yeah.
It's inconsistent, the relationship between rider and dragon. Because there does seem to be some dragons that are like, I love you so much, and if you died, I would die with you because we're so close. And then there are other dragons, I hate this puppet. Can you get rid of it?
Even though they chose them.
Yeah, it would just be nice to see that dichotomy in the book at all.
Yeah, and we are told that the dragon, there's a point in the book where one of the dragons says that the only relationship more important to them than their bond with their human is their bond to their mate. But we don't see this from the dragons at all. It doesn't seem like that's true. And it's kind of weird if that is true that Violet wouldn't have been around dragons her whole life because her mother and sister who she has a fraught relationship with her mother, but it seems like they are close and they have been close their whole life even though their relationship is fraught. And she has a really close relationship to her sister. And it just seems like if my sister had a kid, I would want to be around that kid. Like, I would want to be a part of that kid's life because I have a close relationship with my sister. And you'd think that the dragon would be like, I also want to know who this other person is. And in Temeraire, there's an entire conversation surrounding because dragons live longer than their humans that they're bonded with, where Lawrence is told, you need to have a kid because you're going to die before Temeraire. And he's going to need someone who understands what losing you feels like so that they can be together in their grief. And he will be more likely to bond your kid than he is to bond like some random person. And so there's this whole idea of legacies because the dragon human bond is so important to them, to these characters in Temeraire, that it just doesn't exist here. And it's just really strange. And it doesn't seem like it's portrayed in a way where it's like, well, that relationship is so strong that maybe Violet's mother and Violet's sister become distant because that bond becomes the most important bond in their life. So they start to kind of distance themselves from other people and isolate themselves from them because they're more interested in the bond because we don't see that in the second half of the book where like the dragons are like over there and the humans are always over here and the only time they're together is when they're doing flight practice.
I do have to say, your comment on most of these books is usually, I wish there was more dragons in that. And I'm like, there, I get that. But for the most part, I don't miss it. This is really, truly the first book where I was like, these people are so boring. None of the things that they do make any sense. There should be more dragons in this. So I'm really excited for the next section where there will be dragons.
Yeah, and then the last thing that I kind of want to say is that I was kind of confused about the dragon's size because Violet says she doesn't even come to Taryn's wrist, which is huge. Like beyond massive. But a 10-foot wall can hold up his mate, who is smaller than he is, but can't be that much smaller than he is. So it seems like the way that their size is described, even to that, like if she doesn't come up to his wrist, he would smish her when he grabs her. There's no way he could grab her. Is he grabbing her with one hand? I can't imagine how big he must be. It seems like they're described later as being smaller, and I can't tell if it was hyperbole when she says that or not. And it must have been, right? But it just was confusing because you don't actually know how big they are. So the size was a little bit, I was uncertain of.
The size of the parapet slash bridge is also weird. The size of the Promenade of Dragons is also weird. I just don't think there's a good and consistent sense of scale in this book, which is like a very normal, common book problem. It's hard to visualize in space and especially keep that visualization consistent throughout different scenes because you want them to be really big in one scene and then actually they need to fit in this others see, and so maybe they're a little bit smaller. I totally think that the dragons are as big as they need to be in a particular scene.
Maybe. And then finally, I do just want to talk a little bit about relationships in this book, romantic relationships, or I guess in this book it's more sexual relationships. And I think the main romance obviously doesn't pick up until the next section, so we'll talk about that more in the next section, although I think we talk about it a lot in this episode anyway. But again, like I think the problem with the two of them is they don't really actually have good chemistry. They're just physically attracted to each other. Zayden has some good zingers, but Violet can't keep up with it because she has no game. And it just really just seems like she's only physically attracted to him, and I would have liked more of that build up. I also think it's really interesting the way that this book describes relationships as a whole, because in this war college, which has hundreds of people, everyone is having sex with everyone else. Everyone is hot, everyone is having sex. All of the relationships are messy hookups. There are no characters who are in committed relationships, even as like an offhand, oh, those two random NPCs over there have been dating since year one or something. And this isn't really accurate to how high stress situations work in historical or even a modern context. We can see historically really strong emotional bonds forming in trench warfare. That was a big thing in World War One, where these men were falling in love with each other. And it was then encouraged because they found that they were going to fight harder to protect each other, which was an issue because queerness was still illegal in the broader world in many countries. We also see the ancient Greeks encourage this as well, which, you know, was a little different, but they had a lover that they were protecting and fighting with. And we even see this not necessarily in a romantic sense, but in a relationship sense in pledging situations and fraternities and sororities. And again, not always sexual or romantic, but can be familial or fraternal, where when you're put in a situation that the hazing that happens is it happens in these sororities and fraternities specifically to create these bonds where a lot of things do feel life and death, where when you have this enemy and then you have this group of people who aren't allowed to harm you, which is the squad that Violet is in, you form an extremely protective bond with those people because they're like, okay, this is my squad. These are the people who are going to protect me. So I better protect them because if they die, I have one less person protecting me. And you form trust really quickly in those kinds of situations because it's this us versus them mentality that humans are really, really good at. So you form this really strong bond really, really quickly. So it doesn't really make sense that they have such poor relationships. She's friends with Rhiannon, she's friends with Sawyer and Riddick, but they're just like camp friends. They're not like, we will die for each other kind of thing. And then half the people in her squad also are like, fuck this girl, like I hate her. They should all be extremely loyal to each other. And it could even be like to a fault where they get hurt because they're protecting each other. And then that could cause tension where like one of them gets hurt because they protect Violet in a situation where Violet really miscalculates and misjudges her strength or misjudges her ability. And then that could cause tension where they're like feeling betrayed because they were trying to protect her and she did something stupid or something like that. And that could be really interesting. And the book doesn't seem to acknowledge that this is like a actual human psychological thing that constantly is happening in different really intense situations all around the world and throughout history and is pretty well documented.
If you want a more modern example, there's a lot of really young people getting married who are fighting in the Ukrainian war, and you see a lot of that. So there is literal modern examples of modern warfare where this is happening. This book just doesn't have any space for emotional scenes or any scenes that aren't about Violet about to be murdered or Violet about to kiss a boy.
It's just weird that there are no characters who are having any kind of different relationship or response to this kind of like everyone's response is the same. Well, I could die tomorrow, so I might as well just hook up with a random person, which different people would have different responses to that, and so they would respond to it. Like they would have different reactions. And it also is weird that there is this homogenous response, and yet Violet is the only person not partaking in this behavior. And even though she wants to, she thinks about how she wants to constantly. And she's the only one who doesn't seem like no one's propositioning her either. Like no one's like, hey, you wanna, you know? And she's like not like saying like, oh no, I don't want to, which is kind of weird. That like she's somehow outside of this grouping of actions that every other person in the school is partaking in.
What's strange about it is that she seems to have bought into this culture and then is not engaging with it at all.
She's really sex positive in her mind and she talks about how much she wants to do it and how like she doesn't have any hangups about it and then she doesn't do it at all, which I guess is okay. Like just because you're like sex positive doesn't mean you have to actually partake. But I don't know, like it's just kind of weird that there isn't any more like extra thought where she's like, well, I could, but I don't really want to. Or maybe she doesn't even have this moment where she's like, I would, but I actually would feel unsafe that someone would trick me and then hurt me while, and like kill me instead. Well, we're in like a more vulnerable position or something, which I think is a reasonable thing for her to fear since she's afraid of everyone killing her, but she doesn't think about that.
I could go on forever about how romantic love is the only true relationship people can have, and familiar and like all of the other love is different.
Yeah.
Well, we'll talk more about relationships in the next book.
We'll definitely talk about that in the next book because there's one specific line that Xaden says that made me want to bash my head against a wall.
And we'll talk about the dragons a lot more. Yeah, we have a bunch of notes about dragon books that we will share with you when the time comes. This has been the first half of Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros.
Next time, we'll be finishing off the book with the second half. And that's all we have today. So thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like and hit the subscribe or follow button.
What were your thoughts on Fourth Wing? Did you like it? Did you, like me, have a deep structural problem with the book so far in a way that makes it difficult to enjoy it? Did you really, really like it because you thought it was fun when Violet had daggers or when Xaden was hot or when a dragon blew someone up? Would you recommend this book to others? Let us know in the comments. We said a bunch of stuff and we believe it, and they come from our opinions and what we value in books and literature. But like, that's just us, baby.
Yeah, you're allowed to like
You
it.
can feel however you want.
That's totally fine. I don't judge you for liking this book. I think that's great.
Yeah, literally, my closest friends are already on the third book. So clearly, there is a lot in the, and they share some of the same feelings that we do. So clearly, there's a lot in this book for everyone.
Yeah, like we said in the prior the Orange Tree episodes, it's about values as a reader, and we just have different values as a reader than someone who really loved this book, and that's totally fine because you know what? It's just a book.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.